We are live in 10. Live in...
Good afternoon. The February 6, 2024 board work session is now in order. Paul, roll call, please.
Ms. Wright?
Here.
Mr. Trent?
Here.
Ms. Campbell?
Here.
Ms. Jenkins?
Here.
Mr. Susan?
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So our first topic this afternoon is a mowing plan. Miss Sue, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to have an opportunity to talk about mowing, and hopefully in a positive vein, because we do spend a lot of time talking about mowing. I do want to introduce our Director of Maintenance, Jim Ross, and Richard Vogt, Supervisor in our maintenance department, who actually knows where all our money is. So they will be helping out as we go through the presentation as you have questions. But so I'm going to talk a little bit about mowing, and one thing I want to talk about from the start is that we fund mowing out of the general fund, and that is by statute. So a lot of our budget is capital, and you'll see that later on in the presentation on our budget, but the mowing piece is general fund. So I just wanted to set the stage for that in the conversation around both mowing and our budget later on. So all of you are familiar with our mowing issues, and these kind of started back in 2013 when we had some fairly severe budget constraints. And so one of the things that was done at the time to kind of come within our resources was we took the mowing out of the schools, centralized mowing in maintenance, reduced custodial positions, and saved some money. We added some positions in plan ops, but saved some money in the general fund, and that was solely the intention. I think there was perhaps not a good level of clarity as to the impact on the level of service, but clearly, as we've seen since 2013, we've just not been able to keep up with the mowing with the resources that we have in plan ops. So this has been an issue for a while. So in 2019, we started to look at this again, and we looked at it relative to level of service versus cost. And in 2019, we were still just kind of coming out of the era of severe budget constraints, and we're working through the first couple of years of the sales surtax and kind of making some improvements with our air conditioning systems and our other building systems, but we really just didn't have the support on the general fund side to add significant resources to the budget to address mowing. So at that time, you can find a presentation where I said, I think this is not the time. We had other priorities for general fund at the time, and we didn't add resources back in 2019. We have, as you see, been working around the margins a little bit. We've got a couple of robotic mowers, and those are up and down. We use those for kind of our playfield type of approaches, where we just put it's kind of an electronic fence, so to speak, around the area and let the mower go. Those have been working pretty well. We've got a few that are on order, so we are trying some new things. We did try special purpose ruminants. Those are goats. They are only really usable for messy sloped retention ponds. They're not the fine trimming type of apparatus that you might want. And then we've been experimenting with limited contract mowing. So in 2021, we started contract mowing at 12 schools. We funded through the general fund balance at the time. It's about $225,000, and this really worked pretty well for those 12 schools. And then in 23, going into 24, we transitioned from 12 schools to 27 schools. We eliminated 4 grounds technicians positions in maintenance to fund those, to fund that additional level of service. And this has worked pretty well. So we've got about a third-ish of our schools that are under contract mowing. If you look at the kind of the work orders and the customer reactions that we get, the schools that are under contract mowing are pretty happy with the service that we've been providing. Now, that depends a lot on the contractor and the management of the contractor, so that is not a 100% solution all the time, but in this particular case, we've had a good vendor, they've done a good job, and we've been using that technique into fiscal year '24. So one of the lessons we learned last year is we really didn't start that soon enough. We kind of waited until the start of the fiscal year, and that was on us. And we got behind in the mowing to start. So in terms of the plan going forward for 2025, you'll see a recommendation from me that we start April 1st versus waiting to start with the start of the fiscal year. And that will allow us to get ahead of the mowing versus starting from behind. So that was the purpose of mentioning that in terms of a lesson learned. So as where we are today, as you all have experienced, we're still under-resourced to provide the level of service that we'd like to have. And I think over time, we have taken care of some of our major issues in terms of like air conditioning and other building systems. And we're starting to be more cognizant of the importance of curb appeal at our schools. And so we're doing more in painting, and we need to do more in grounds maintenance. So this has really become a higher priority than it was back in 2013 or it was back in 2019. And so this is a kind of a summary of our recommendations for our mowing plan. We'd like to upgrade the level of service that we have at the 27 schools to all schools. And so that would be weekly mowing between April and September, and bi-weekly between October and March. And we had put a contract out for bid, and I gotta give some shout outs to our friends in procurement and our folks in maintenance. We literally walked every single site with our contractors and made sure that everybody was clear on the scope of services. Because when you say mowing, it's kind of, we got a lot of stuff out there. So we've got to be clear what is in the contract and what is not in the contract. And so our folks in procurement really did a great job supporting us. I mean, they literally spent a couple weeks walking around school sites with our folks in maintenance. So we've got good bids. The pricing that came in was pretty comparable to what we're paying at the 27 sites, so they're valid bids. Procurement's kind of working through who the apparent low bidders are. We're looking at potentially doing a primary, secondary, and possibly even a tertiary contractor award, so that if for some reason the primary low bidder can't do the job, we have a backup and a backup. The award is going to be done in, I think it's nine chunks of schools. There are about 9 to 10 schools in each chunk. So we'll have probably 2 to 4 contractors that are awarded the bid. So it's not all one vendor. The cost of this is about $850,000 on an annualized basis, more than what we have budgeted now. The last quarter of 2024, we're estimating about $250,000. These are numbers based on the bids that came in, but we're not settled on exactly who the low bidders are, and we want to make sure that we've at least accounted for an eventuality where we might have to go to a second low bidder on certain groups of schools. So these numbers are probably a little bit on the high side, but it gives you an order of magnitude of what it would take to transition from where we are to where we want to go relative to the level of service for mowing. So this is the scope of work that our contractors bid on, and I want to be like super clear about this. This is school site mowing. This isn't athletic field mowing. This isn't play field mowing. This is just kind of the school front type. You know, when you pull into the school, it will look like a well-maintained school. That's what's in the scope. They'll be doing some light retention pond maintenance. Litter is not their job, but it's also not their job to mow over litter. So we have an expectation that if it's in the way, they pick it up, but litter control is still on us. There's edging of sidewalks, curbs, parking lots, flower and shrub beds. So again, the kind of the basics of the front door of the school, so to speak, will be part of this contract. Also asking them to weed whack our fence lines, and we've got a lot of fence lines. We'll still be doing the herbicide, but the general like knock down the weeds will be part of this contract, and then rake and remove any excessive grass clippings. So basic lawn mowing-ish type service for each of our schools. We're also proposing, at least for now, to retain the grounds technicians positions that we have. We have 14 FTEs, 13 are filled, one was vacant as of January 31st. I think we may be in the process of filling that. But we've got a lot of work for these folks to do. First and foremost, we want to make sure that this contracted mowing experiment is successful. So we don't want to get rid of all of our personnel and our equipment until we are sure that this is going to work. I've had some experience with this in a prior life where it seemed like a great idea to contract out this type of service, and it was until it wasn't. And then you don't have the people, you don't have the equipment, and it's impossible to recover. So having this sort of hybrid where we do contract mowing, but we also retain mowing capabilities in-house allows us to backstop a contractor if for some reason that doesn't work out. We and our contractors experience issues with, we can't match the labor force. We have people, on vacation calling in sick. We have bad weather. The same things that we experience that affect our level of service will affect their level of service too. So we want to make sure to have a backup plan or two in mind. One of the things that is technically a custodial responsibility is to rake playground mulch, and that kind of keeps it safe for our kids. And with our custodial shortages, we're concerned that that is not a high enough priority for our on-site custodians, and we'd like to take that back as our responsibility in maintenance. And kind of like we've been doing with our preventative maintenance crew is to put up a crew and they go site to site and make sure that our playground mulch is adequate depth and is raked and make sure that it's safe. Eventually we'll be transitioning to the rubberized play tiles, but that's going to take a few years to get there. So that's one of the primary functions of the retaining our ground techs. Also assisting with mowing our play fields and athletics fields as we start school and everybody's like, oh my gosh, the whatever field is not mowed or it is not ready. We'd like to be able to help and respond to that a little bit more effectively. So it's really, really hopeful that we will do a better job all around. So the front door of the school will look better, but some of the backside things will also be better as a result of being able to focus these positions on some of that other work that gets neglected. Mrs. Wright, you had sent me an issue at University Park, and that was like a perfect example of work that just doesn't get done because nobody has time to do it. And it was a drainage issue, water's coming into the courtyard, and it's flooding. And we sent some folks down and we wandered around, and it's like, well, geez, we could jet out this pipe, we could take the grass that's growing out of the drainage structure, and perhaps it might work a little better. So we have a lot of those things that are just kind of neglected general maintenance. And I think, again, we can stand up a crew or two or three and start to address some of these things that are affecting us in other ways and costing money and affecting our learning environment, affecting our schools. So I think we've got plenty of work for these folks, and that will provide an overall better level of service for our schools. So that's the end of my presentation. Wanted to ask the board for some guidance on your thoughts on this approach. If you would like us to move forward, what we would put on the board agenda for the 27th would be the award of bid. As I mentioned, low bid and secondary and possibly a tertiary vendor for each of the chunks of schools. Would include a budget amendment to implement April 1st. And then we would include contracted mowing in our FY25 budget. So that concludes our mowing presentation.
Thank you, Sue. Appreciate you. Board, I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions. Go ahead, Mr. Susan, you're raising your hand.
If that's what it takes to get it over the finish line, I believe Mr. Raymer can work on that because I know this is important to his schools.
No, my first concern was about the gentlemen that are actually doing this because they've been, working their booties off for so long. Against numbers and, it keeps raining and they have to sit and watch it grow and then know that they have to get out there and do it. And I wanted to make sure they were taken care of. So I think they'll be glad to know that they have different duties, but the other stuff's being taken care of. I appreciate you taking preference to our athletic fields because it's a different type of mower. It's a real mower as opposed to, and companies that come in to do that are completely, they don't understand the need behind it. So thank you for that. I like this. I love it. Every year we have a situation when school opens that, you know what I mean? Some of the schools are still trying to race to mow the grass. Our teams are trying to mow the grass, and this takes care of that. We need to look professional if we're going to be, and this is part of the imaging and attraction campaign that we have. So thank you. That's it. But it'd be nice if some of those animals could make it out there every once in a while.
Anybody else have?
Yeah.
Ms. Jenkins?
Can you go to slide number 7?
No, something told me I should have put
I
slide
just-
numbers on here.
I just want you to get respect for your meme game. That's all. I felt like we went over that really fantastic meme of
which
you
one?
fought the lawn and the lawn
3,
won.
4, 5, 6, 7, that one.
I just want respect for that one.
So
The animals are cute too, but that was great.
I may have borrowed that from someone else who was more creative.
I love it. I love it. No, all kidding aside, I know that this isn't easy work by any means. This is beyond a task, and it's probably one of the most common complaints that we get as school board members from both schools and from parents. So thank you for finally tackling this. And I hear you that don't rush into it. It may not work out, but fingers crossed. So thanks.
I'll add to that list of people that we hear from is our community members, you know, especially along certain roads. I thank you for giving us this information, and I will tell you, it hurts just a little bit to spend almost $1 million mowing the grass, and I know it hurts you guys too because, you know, it's got to come from somewhere else, and part of me as, you know, fiduciary responsibility, I want to know, okay, where's it going to come from? Do we have the $850? You know, the additional funding that we can set aside. So that's one question that I have. But then also, I want to make sure I understand the role of the contractor versus our team, because is it just like in front of the fence? Because I also hear from our schools frequently, you know, the areas that are behind the fence that are still kind of central areas, and of course those play fields, because when the grass is, you know, 9 to 12 inches higher or taller, we have snakes, we have, you know, all kinds of things that cause a problem. So any clarity on that?
So I'm going to ask Jim to weigh in on that, just since you were out, you know a little bit more about this, just to.
So that was part of the process of keeping the existing grounds crew, because we can now mow the fields more often also because we'll have that extra resource. The fields are mowed, will stay in-house. They will not go to the contractor. Contractor will basically mow around the school, around the sidewalks, everything from around the building out to the
Okay.
street.
So
including
behind the
curbs
fence,
and-
but not
So,
out in the,
Not out in the
external.
play fields
Gotcha.
and things like that, yes. And currently, that's the way we do it. Our heavy equipment operators and grounds crew do that. Our grounds maintenance techs do around the school. So we're just taking that grounds maintenance tech and wanting to reutilize them and then have contracted mowing do that part of it.
okay. So that's one of the things. So this should enable those 13, 14 employees, BPS employees, to do more frequent field
Yes.
mowing. Okay, fantastic. And then you had put in there on something about the current contractors. So will these groups of 9 schools, these clusters, well, that's not going to be in addition to, that's just kind of wiping the slate clean and we're starting over.
Correct. Once we do the notice of award, and then once the board awards the contract, then we'll let our existing vendors know that we'll be transitioning to the new contract as of April 1st.
Okay, are some of those the same?
Possibly.
Okay.
We're procurement's evaluating all the bids, so
Okay.
I'm not crystal clear on, but
Okay.
our existing vendors are in the mix.
Right. Well, I appreciate the secondary, tertiary. So they'll be basically on call. So if we have extenuating circumstances, we can call up the second line of defense.
Yes, but keep
Okay.
in mind, they'll staff for this type of, like, this is a fair amount of work. So whoever gets the bid award will staff up for this. Those that don't will not necessarily, and probably, you know, they may be able to respond on a moment's notice. They may not, because they won't be staffed for the project as a whole.
Right.
But we do want to have that opportunity to at least ask.
Right. Well, I thank you for answering the questions. I just, you know, I mean, I was here for the goat conversation, and by the way, we talked about a lot of things that day, and the only thing that made the news was the goats. But you know, and that was, I appreciate always the creative solutions that we come up with. But this is, as much as I do hate to spend almost $1 million on the grass, it affects the learning environment, it affects our community and our community's perception of the schools. It affects safety, because when we do have more hiding places for our, you know, creepy critters, we live in Florida, it becomes a problem. And so very much appreciate you taking this deep dive. So I'm supportive.
Mr. Trent, anything to add?
Yeah, so Sue and I, we've gone way back talking about the parents of schools, so I'm glad we're tackling this now. I was in a school recently that was a contracted landscaping, and they just couldn't brag enough on how smooth it had gone from one situation to the next. You know, that it was, they were just very, very pleased, and I'd like to see it continue, and I think it just makes a lot of sense. So. We appreciate all the work for all of you, especially going to every single site and walking through what we're expecting to have done. We're getting used to you guys doing 100%. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Quick question. I think you hit on this a little bit. So you guys walked every single site, correct? And
Those guys.
those guys, okay. And you did this with the contractor hand in hand. So the scope of work they gave you was site specific to each one of the schools, and they were comfortable with what they were doing there.
Yes.
And then was that turned into us when it came time for the bid for the procurement? So we have a very specific scope of what is being done at each school site in case there's ever a, hey, you should have mowed this, and they say, no, that's not in our contract.
I can't say it's specific to each site, but there's a general guideline of what's to be mowed, and that was one of the reasons we walked it, because we wanted everybody to be on the same page. So, no, we don't have, like, at this school, you're going to mow this. We did give them maps, so they do have that, but we felt it was in the best interest of the district to have them walk the sites with us, so there were no surprises. And it took like 3 weeks to do that. So.
I imagine it would be quite a process, but I think it would be smart of us just to make sure we have that clearly outlined in the contract, because I could see where we could end up with an issue where it's a, hey, you should have mowed this, and they're saying, no, that wasn't part of what we talked about. So when we look at that, that's would make me feel a little more comfortable with it. I think it's a great solution. Obviously, we do get a lot of phone calls from people in the community when it comes to the grounds maintenance. And as a parent, my perspective is, if you're not taking care of the outside of the building, what makes me think that you're going to take care of the inside of the building, which is where my child's at. So I think it's very, very smart of us to make sure we're making a focus on keeping our buildings appealing, and it helps the neighborhood overall. So my only one ask would be just to clearly define in those contracts where the expectation is for mowing, so there can't be a, pointing fingers kind of
So
situation.
the list I had on the second to last slide or so, that is actual language from the contract. So what we don't have, I don't think, is maps that are attached to each site, but we do have the specifics on what's in the contract expectations. So that bulleted list of what we're doing, that is taken exactly from the RFQ or RFP or ITB. It was an ITB.
Okay.
So that's with, except for that piece that's underlined, that's actual language in the invitation to bid.
Okay. All right. No, I'm in favor of it. Honestly, I think it solves a huge issue that we have, and we get a lot of phone calls and emails about the maintenance of the outside of the building, especially sidewalks. That one we get a lot of phone calls on that. So thank you for the presentation and being forward thinking on a way to solve this, so that hopefully next year we won't have those same phone calls. All right. Any
Thank
other
you.
comments on this one?
I think if you look at the overall cost too, at the number of sites that we have, if you divide that by the amount of money, you start to really see that it's not as much as you think. But to have, 86 or 100 and something sites that we're going to be mowing at, you divide it by that, it becomes $800 or $1,000 a year to be consistently mowed for the entire year, which is, it's understandable when you're talking about commercial mowing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is pretty reasonable, and it's really, the force multiplier is kind of on the back end with our folks and being able to get more work done at the schools that's currently not getting done. So I'm pretty excited about that, actually.
Yeah, it'll be good. All right, so our next topic that we have is the facility maintenance and staffing budget update. And Sue, you have the floor again.
Okay. So the purpose of this is just to kind of give you all a little bit of a framework of our FY25 budget requests. And I know we're moving into the era of zero-based budgeting. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands kind of where we are in facilities. We are trying to be performance-driven. And by being performance-driven, I can literally spend any resource we have in an excellent way in our schools. And so you won't be seeing budget reductions in facilities. You'll be seeing expectations of better performance that comes with more resources. But I wanted to kind of just give you the framework of things that we've been talking about and dive in a little bit to the capital side of our house in maintenance. Because the capital project or capital program cycle is coming up, and you'll be seeing that ahead of the FY25 budget. And just wanted to kind of let you know where we're going and where we think we should go with the capital side of the house relative to maintenance. So I'm going to give you guys like a lot of information, probably really fast. You have seen some of this before. Some of this you haven't seen because we haven't had the tools to give you this information. Jim's team has implemented not only our facility assessment project, but also we have new work order software. And so between those two things, we have a really good handle on our assets. So we can actually tell you how much stuff we have. And now that we can tell you how much stuff we have, it's pretty scary because we have a lot of stuff. But our current replacement value, over $2 billion, use that number a lot. Like, we have a lot of stuff. And if you're just focused on one school or two schools, it seems kind of manageable. But over 85 schools, it's a lot of stuff. And this is a little bit more detail on the lot of stuff that we have. 142 chillers, almost 1,000 transformers. It is a lot. And we are pretty thinly staffed to maintain all of this stuff. And you'll see later in the presentation where we talk about going to contracted maintenance much more out of necessity. And we're adding stuff pretty much every day. So this list keeps growing. This is our chiller team. And these guys do an incredibly good job. And chillers, kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of better performance from your facilities group. This is where we started with the sales surtax program in 2014. We had seriously bad air conditioning issues, and we have done a really good job of refreshing our chillers. And you see every year as we go through our construction contracts that we're kind of doing a handful of chillers every year. And we've kind of gotten ourselves to a place where our chillers are on a really pretty good replacement schedule. So this is something that I'm really, really proud of. Big asset to the district, very important to the learning environment, and we're doing pretty well. The one thing that has really slayed us is when we need temporary air for some reason, a chiller is down, it takes us 1.5 years to get a new chiller. So our temporary air bill has been crazy high. We literally could buy chillers for the amount of money that we spend on temporary chillers. And in fact, we recently bought a small temporary chiller, trying to avoid that circumstance. But the heavy-duty lead time that we have for temporary air is one of the things that is impacting the budget on the maintenance side. So also wanted to talk a little bit about our work order software. So we implemented this system in FY21, and we do about 36,000 work orders a year. And every one of those 36,000 work orders has gone through one of those two ladies that you see on the slide. So we have two folks, and they manage all of those work order systems. As we do our zero-based budgeting, you might see us thinking about some staff in terms of scheduling work. So we're looking at different types of positions. So you might see some potential new positions coming on your agenda just to kind of set the framework for making that happen. So nothing that I'm ready to really talk about today other than just to say this is a big area of our system. And we put a lot of work through these two nice ladies in maintenance that answer the phone and take care of anything that comes through our impulse work order system. So we do about 3,000 work orders a month, and the fourth bullet there, 4,400 or 4,500 preventative maintenance work orders created. That is a huge, huge step for us. This is kind of this is a distribution of our work orders. You see about half of them are in the urgent or emergency, about half of them are in routine, and that's going to become important later on. But also, 12.6% of all of our work orders are preventative maintenance. That number was 0 in FY21, and I believe it was probably 0 prior to FY21. So we had this monstrous backlog of work that we needed to do, and I'm really proud of our team because we are now preserving our assets versus just replacing them and forgetting about them. We're really changing the game in terms of how we do business, and I'm super proud of our folks for the work that they've accomplished here. And as a result, I'm going to show you some pictures that just kind of give you the sense of what it did look like and what it looks like now. This is little stuff, right? You know, we just scrape the rust off and put some paint on, but it's so impactful in terms of preserving the life of our assets. And as you saw in the beginning, we have lots and lots of assets. So our guys are like really making a difference in terms of making sure our equipment remains reliable for our teachers and our students. So anyway, very proud of our preventative maintenance efforts. And as we do more to refresh and rebuild and renew our major assets in terms of like air conditioning and electrical and all that, we can put more effort into preventative maintenance. So there's a big game changer this year in our maintenance department. So our staffing, got lots of statistics about staff, but basically we have about 100 of our 160 are allocated to the trades. And that means carpenters, electricians, that type of thing. 14 of those are vacant. This is a slide that just kind of shows you our increasing amount of square footage, and it's about to go up again with a new middle school, and our sort of decreasing-ish amount of people to do all of this maintenance. You know, if you look at this back in like the early 2000s, we had another 30 or so people that we have now working the trades. So this is a concern. This kind of graphically illustrates that a little more clearly. So the Florida DOE recommended formula is 1 tech per 45,000 square feet. So that's this line. And we're at 1 tech for about 15,000 square feet, or I'm sorry, 150,000 square feet. So we're about a third staffed as to where we should be in terms of the trades. So we're always running like our hair's on fire. Like literally that's how we operate pretty much 100% of the time. We also struggle with vacancies, as do our contractors, trying to find folks that can do this work for us, and we literally have every single system. Like it is complicated. We have air conditioning, electrical, plumbing, carpentry, building automation systems, flooring, masonry. Like literally have any trade you can imagine. We have that need in our schools, and you can see we have staff, but typically we have vacancies within all of our trades. So I'm going to just give you a sense of where we've been struggling. And this is, I think there's 4 or 7 positions that have been vacant for a year-ish or more. We cannot find another roofer. And sometimes this is churn, and sometimes this is just inability to fill the position. Part of this is the rates that we pay. Part of this is just these folks are not available. So I think we have both challenges. Similarly, some other trades that have been carrying vacancies for several months. And this is a graphical representation of this, and you can kind of see by trade how many folks we have versus how many folks we're missing. So we have a couple of concerns around staffing. So first of all, we have experienced people who are retiring. So we have folks who know everything and they are retiring. We also have new folks that are coming in that are eager and excited to learn. We teach them great stuff, and then they find a job in the private sector or in another public sector. We compete with some of the other public sector employers here, like the port, for example, Kennedy Space Center, for our tradespeople. So we're really in a competitive environment for skilled trades workers here in Brevard. So it's pretty challenging to fill our vacancies. We also have an evolving a situation where our needs are evolving, because a lot of the assets that we're buying now have more technology embedded in them. So our chillers, our building automation systems, our lighting systems, our intercoms, all of our security cameras, much more high tech than they were 10 years ago. So the skill set that's needed is different. In fact, Mr. Cheatham and I have been, and Mr. Ross, we've been talking about, is there a better way to staff some of these maintenance projects? So you might see maybe some positions coming from my department going over to Russell's department, just because the skill set that's needed on that side of the house would better serve some of the functions that we have in our budget and facilities. So just something to give you a heads up on, that we collectively might be looking at what's the better way to make sure that we are maintaining those assets that have that high-tech component to them. We've been, as I mentioned, going to more contracted work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the financial side. Richard has developed this. Many of you, I think, are familiar with Smartsheet. This is actually in Smartsheet. And if we want to go into lots and lots of detail, I can pull it up. But he tracks the budget pretty much on a daily basis. So on any given day, we know where we are. And I want to kind of highlight a couple of lines. So this gray line is FY23. Green line is FY24. Blue line is our budget in plant operations and maintenance. And every year we kind of do the same dance, where we start our year off with a backlog of work that we need to do, because we kind of ran out of money at the end of the prior fiscal year. And so in May and June, we accumulate lots of work orders that we don't fund, and they sit there until July, and then the system wipes them out, and then we re-enter them all, and then we do a bunch of work in July, and we start spending money and implementing work. Now, there's very rarely a work order that we shouldn't do. Like, we do have a few where it's like, no, we're not gonna do that. But everything from, oh my gosh, the air conditioning doesn't work, to, hey, your tree is overhanging our property and needs to be trimmed, that all goes through our system. And Jim is in the position of having to prioritize those as to whether we got to do it for our schools, or whether this is something that is bothering the neighbor and we just need to get it done. But all of those things run through this system and run through this budget. So every year we do a little bit more work, and the work has gotten a little bit more expensive. But in particular this year, I wanted you to notice that the delta between where we are more or less today is and where we were a year ago is about $2 million. And if you kind of keep that going, we're going to be up here somewhere. So our delta is bigger. Now, where we cover that is through facility renewal capital that comes through the capital program, comes into kind of the project side of the house, and that's about a $6.2-ish million piece of the capital plan. And I kind of sit on that because I know that maintenance is going to run out of money, and so I start to help them as time goes on. So you see these little inflection points. That's when I'm moving money from the project side over to the maintenance side to try to cover that. But what I'm really going to be advocating for as we go forward in FY25 is to fund maintenance properly, so that we don't have the big dips in the funding that we are experiencing. So as I mentioned, we sort of do this self-created backlog process every year as we get towards the end of the fiscal year. And in fiscal year 22, we had about $750,000 in deferred work, 155 requests, 92 days in queue. Now think about that. So 3 months people are waiting for us to get the work done, and then we start over in July, so it's probably another month and a half to 2 months. So it might be 5 months before we get whatever that work order request is done. Now, our kind of perspective is if we're gonna do it, we might as well do it now versus do it 5 months from now. Like the answer should be, no, we're not gonna do it, or yes, we're gonna do it and we're gonna do it soon. So the span of time that is sort of artificially created by our wonky funding cycle is really not in good service to our schools. So we'd like to fix that. The other problem is that the fiscal year change order is right in the summer construction season. So it's kind of the worst time to have these wonky funding scenarios given the time that's when we want to do most of our work. So anyway, let me talk a little bit about facility capital renewal. So as I mentioned, I get the 6.2 million on the project side of the fence. I kind of don't do much with that. Like I used to do some projects with it, and now it just sort of sits there because I worry about being able to fund anything they need on the maintenance side. I worry about whether we're going to have any storms. We had a couple fires. I just, do little stuff with it, but I'm not doing anything substantial with that because I'm concerned about not being able to get to the end of the fiscal year or until December when we get our new capital revenue. So put these graphs together to kind of illustrate that point. We get our capital money in December. So property taxes come in, we get a big chunk of money. I get about 6.2, 6.3, it varies every year for the facility capital renewal project, and then we kind of spend it down. And you see the kind of the low point here, July, August, September, where I've got about $1.5 million, 2 million left. That's storm season. That's school is starting season. And so it just concerns me that that's kind of the lowest point in our revenue stream in our department, and it coincides with a potentially high demand season. Especially concerning this year, this yellow line is this year, is we've really had to supplant maintenance. So I'm already into maintenance, 1.6 million from the project side to the maintenance side of the house. And you're estimating, and saw in the graph, we estimate another 2 million. So this shows kind of the cyclical nature of this. So we get our money in December, and these are actual numbers. I pulled this out of AS 400. So we get down to $1 million and change, we go back up, we go back down. And you see the lowest point of this is the worst possible time. So really motivated to try to fix this so we don't have this situation. This table shows you the transfer from facility capital renewal to maintenance. And it used to be kind of in the 800,000 to $1.5 million, 800,000 to $1.5 million, but we're going to be probably over 3.5 million this year by the time it's all said and done, because what's coming into the work order system is work that needs to be done. And so I don't want to just like not do it. So use the money on my side of the house to the maintenance side of the house. But it's getting to where it's a little bit unmanageable. So why is this happening? So cost increasing, we're using more contracted labor because of the fact that we don't have our in-house labor, more expensive just in general, price increases in labor and materials, lead time's crazy, and we just have more costs that we have to cover to do the same work. This series of graphs shows you the change in contracted labor. So this is our contracted labor, and this is our materials and supplies line, which kind of stayed about flat because the cost of materials and supplies has gone up. So even though we may be using less materials and supplies, the cost of those materials and supplies is about the same. But you can clearly see that our percent of total budget is creeping up to about 70-ish% of the total maintenance budget is now in contracted services. So the other reason that our costs are increasing is our scope is increasing. We've done a lot more work in athletics. We've done big projects, but now we're maintaining tracks, and we want to maintain our stuff. Like we used to do projects and then that's it. We do a project in another 20 years. Now we want to actively do maintenance. We've also added a lot of assets. We have many more cameras than we used to have in the district. Somebody's got to maintain those. We got to maintain the miles of fences that we put up. A lot of things that we are doing differently in the district in service to our schools and our students, but all of that needs to be maintained. So the scope and the the landscape over which we need to do maintenance has been increasing over the years. We're also still getting older. Our schools are getting older. We have some underground situations that I'm nervous about. When we talk about site drainage, we're going to need to be doing some major drainage, major parking. That's a set of assets we haven't really dealt with. We also have aging water and sewer utilities. You all see the, hey, water line broke at such and such a school. We should be getting in there and doing some rehab on our water and sewer facilities. So a lot of underground stuff that we don't know about that is starting to age and break. So, and then I think the final thing is just an expectation of a higher level of service. I would say we have a higher expectation internally. Like, we used to be able to say, we don't have enough resources, too bad, we're not helping you. But now we'd like to help our schools. We'd like to recognize the importance of our work in the educational mission. Like, people can't learn if we don't have air conditioning. If the mowing isn't done, folks want to go somewhere else. So we have a really important role, and we have a higher expectation and performance for ourselves. So this is how we're funded. The maintenance budget is about $17.3 million, and we get about 11.3 of that through LCI as the capital money. So when you see the capital plan off the top, 11.3 has been coming to maintenance. And then this shows you the whole capital pie is about 101 million. The maintenance salaries and operating is 11.3 million. We've got debt service comes out of that, property insurance, charter schools. This is a 20% share this year, and that's going to, on that glide path going up. So that'll be at least double next year, if not more. And then what's left is for other capital projects. So this is where we fund school buses and technology. The 6.2 million that's facility capital renewal is part of that 41.1 million, and all of the other capital projects that you see in the annual cycle. This gives you kind of a detail of the 41.1 million, that's the other capital projects. And this is the capital renewal amount that I kind of sit over off to the side in order to support maintenance and other unexpected things that come up. So we're thinking that there will be Cindy said about a 4% increase in capital revenue in FY25. So hopefully we can support some additional resources going to the maintenance side of the house. So our goals are improving service to school, continue improving our operations, maintaining the assets that we have, and doing that properly. So this is kind of the end game, and our recommendations are to properly fund maintenance. And our suggestion is to increase the off-the-top capital allocation by $3.5 million and bringing that up to $14.8 million in FY25. So I say that because that will get rid of that big dip at the worst part of the year. It'll allow them to continue working, and will eliminate all those crazy budget machinations that we do every year because our money keeps going like this. So it'll help us a lot, but it may also be at the expense of other capital projects. So that's why I wanted to show you the full gamut of, this is what we spend that pie on. And if we take a bigger piece of the pie for maintenance and the pie isn't getting bigger, there will be some impacts to that. But when we do our capital allocation process, and we do that collaboratively with other members of cabinet, I'm going to advocate for increasing that off the top share to maintenance. Also on the general fund side, just wanted to make you aware of a couple of things we'll be asking for. One is in the mowing arena, and that'll be an $850,000-ish change in FY25. We would like to redo our facility assessment. That's the project that we did in 2019, just ahead of the 2020 surtax renewal. It's about time to update that. We're talking with the vendor about scope, and I think we're going to broaden the scope because last time we didn't do our athletic facilities, our portables, or some things that we left out to try to contain costs. So we're working on that and should have a better budget figure, but that's about broad level estimate. And there's just the cost of materials and the cost of services that are not able to be funded through capital, specifically in the grounds maintenance arena, are going up. So you will likely see some increased requests in our general fund budget. And I think that's it. So I appreciate your time today, and I know this is like a lot of stuff, but I wanted you all to see kind of what we're doing, where we're going, and where we think we can make some improvements with funding our operation a little bit differently. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sue. Board members, any questions? Mr. Kinsler, Ms. Campbell?
Thank you again. So I had a question about the change. So you're saying you're advocating for an increase in just overall, or is it a shift in the timing of it? Because I'm trying to figure out, is it a one-time shift in timing, or is it just an overall, we're gonna, from this point on, have a $3 million increase to the budget?
It is a $3.5 million increase to the budget that will continue year after year.
So we'll still have that cycle, but it won't get so close to the bottom.
It won't get so close to the bottom. In fact, you may not see that again, because that graph was the facility capital renewal. That was money on my side of the fence. So if I don't have to put any over on Jim's side of the fence, I won't be so worried about that.
Okay.
So it doesn't, it affects, this thing affects the maintenance budget because so much of that is going over to help them.
Okay.
But if I don't have to send so much over there, I can live with that on my side and just manage the project costs.
Okay. That makes sense. And then, so we do capital transfers into the general fund. So I know you said things like mowing and grounds maintenance has to be out of the general fund, but can it be taken care of with a capital transfer to the general fund? Is that some of what you're talking about?
No.
No.
So the capital transfer to the general fund goes into Jim's department for work that can be funded by capital.
So
but it's-
everything else.
Right.
Right, okay. We've had that conversation before. I'm just trying to figure out,
Yep.
because actually this is the first time that I realized that the statute actually has written
Specific
specifically,
to
you
mowing.
can't mow out of capital. You have to, it seems like that should have been on some of the deregulation bills that are work that's going on. I'll have to look and, can we get that out of there? Because it seems like as a school board, we should be able to handle things like that.
So oddly, we can buy equipment. So
Right.
there you see grounds equipment in the capital plan, but you don't see any grounds contract services
Right.
or people over there,
But just for mowing,
just for mowing, right?
that needs to go to the dereg next year. All right, let's add that to the list, please. Somebody make a note. So again, I kind of like the other question, what won't get done? So you talked about if we have an increase of $3 million this year, then maybe we just won't see an increase in the capital dollars available. But I mean, is that kind of how you're anticipating this is going to go this year? Is that this year it'll be more flat because we're going to take this $3 million and move it to maintenance?
So I think it'll be kind of flat, and I also think that I may not need 6.2 million. I might be able to say, look, maybe 5.8 million. So like I might be able to absorb some of that on the side of the facility capital renewal. As we start to fund maintenance more appropriately, the less I have to worry about that. I think
That's true.
that number can probably go down a little bit.
That's true. I just think about all the agenda items that I've seen, that it was a sales surtax project, but the scope of the project went beyond the sales surtax plan, and so it came out of that bucket.
That's where it comes.
Or it was something that couldn't be done by that. And so that bucket is something that we've used so frequently, and we need it.
Yes.
Quite frequently. And thankfully, the surtax has done so much better, continued to do so much better than we anticipated, so we have that extra fund. But there's always that, if it can't be done,
Right.
and do you absorb that out of that funding. So, but I will tell you, Sue, you always do such a great job, you and your team, and have proven yourself so trustworthy. I have to surrender to your expertise, of your whole team. And, I mean, I just know how to turn the lawnmower on. I mean, that's just about it. So, but I appreciate the serious work you've thought about the funding, because it is, we have really seen a shift even since my beginning time on the board to this idea of let's take care of it better on the front end so it's not so expensive on the back end. Unfortunately, it takes a while to see that payoff, but I think we're starting to see some of that. So hopefully it'll keep moving forward. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Susan. You're good. Mr. Trent?
Same. Good.
You're
Thank
good.
you.
All right. No, I think this is a great presentation, honestly, and the facility assessment, that part of it I'm very excited about. Honestly, that was one of the things I wrote, was to go through each one of our facilities, every bit of property that we own, and sit down with not only just us from the building department or whoever it is, but have the staff at the school, because I walk classrooms sometimes and silly little things like, oh, we're missing a tile here, or little things, right, which end up being a work order. But just so we have a good idea of what needs to be fixed in each one of our school sites. I think it's interesting. It's your slides are spot on. They highlight a lot of the issues we have. We're increasing in square footage. We're decreasing in personnel. Now we have a longer backlog of work order. Obviously, we can see like what's happening here. And again, you guys do a phenomenal job. So we have the utmost respect. I know I have the utmost respect for you and your team there and what you guys are doing. So you have my blessing to go forward. I trust all the things that you're doing because you're doing an amazing job. So we appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Wright, and thank you to the board. I will say, like, all of the facility capital programming work is a collaborative effort with my peers on cabinet and their support. Like, we work together on this really well, so we all give and take. And so even though I'm the first one to tell you about all this, I will absolutely be a team player with my friends on cabinet, because we want to do the best work for our schools as a whole.
Right.
So if solving my problem entirely means it creates a problem with them, we might solve my problem 80% and try to, so I want everybody that's my peers back there to understand that we will be working together on this, and we want to do our best job for the schools. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. All right, board, are you good? Do you need to take a recess for restroom break or anything? Nope. All right. So we are on to our next topic, which is the Orchid Lake Educational Facilities Impact Fee Deferral Contract. And I think we have some gentlemen here that are going to present to us. Let me switch.
Ms. Wright, just by way of introduction, I want to introduce Mr. Larson, Mr. Crump. Mr. Larson's representing the development group, and Mr. Crump is representing Housing for the Homeless. They had proposed an impact fee exemption for a portion of their project, and wanted an opportunity for them to discuss that with you before we put it on the agenda. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. My name is Jason Larson. I'm with Housing Trust Group. We're a affordable housing developer based in Coconut Grove. And we partnered with Rob Cramp and his organization, Housing for Homeless, that's based in Rockledge, and has a lot of experience in dealing with homeless households and homeless families in Brevard County. And in 2001, we teamed up and we submitted an application for funding to Florida Housing for the development of a 90-unit apartment complex called Orchid Lake. It's in Cocoa. It's generally at the southeast corner of Michigan Avenue and Clear Lake Road. And we applied. The program is a special set aside for homeless families. So of the 90 units, 45 are set aside for homeless households. We've got 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. We actually worked with the Brevard County Housing Authority to get funding to cover the rental income for the homeless units. So families that qualify will only have to pay a portion of what their income is. And so they won't be precluded from living there because they don't make enough money. And so, we kind of working with this, we had come across the homeless development that the Housing Authority, the school board had participated in, St. Stephen's Way. with a long-term deferral of the school fee waivers, or the school fees. And so we thought that it might be an opportunity for us and Orchid Lake to maybe partner with the school board, and we give the school board some participation in this development, such that we could, work with the school board for referrals or anything with, your students that are experiencing homelessness and their families. So we wanted to come here and speak with you about, and Rob, I don't know if you.
Yeah, I'm the executive director for Housing for Homeless. We've been in Brevard since 1989. We currently have around 90 units, 90 properties across the county that we house homeless and low income. A third of them are for veterans and their families. And I think what Orchid Lake is going to be different, though. The homeless support that HUD provides is, as you know, they provide more funding than any other government authority. But it's not, it's really just about housing. It isn't about, well, when you've got them in there, now what are you going to do? And there's very little funding supplied for the support of the people once they're in there. And children particularly suffer from this lack of support. So to be frank, over many of the years that we've housed people, we bring them in and we help them stabilize the situation, but they leave eventually, and 90% of our residents are able to transition to their own properties, but they keep the same issues, children's issues, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, because there isn't the support available, isn't the funding for support. Orchid Lake's going to be different. We not only have case management for the families, we have what we call resident service coordinators who will work with the case manager, identify what the issues are that the children or the adults may be having, go out and find the health service provider that can provide that support, follow through to make sure it's delivered, and measure the results. And that is for nobody else in Brevard is doing this at all. There is nobody even approaching this. And it's so important because, as you all probably well know yourself, the medical healthcare community is hopelessly fragmented. It is very difficult. Case manager working, you'll hear people talk about case managers. They don't have any time to go out and try and find out who they should talk to about getting support. And this way, we feel we're getting better support. We're going to see spectacular results in the improvement of family conditions. And we don't keep these homeless families separated. The other half will be for what we call workforce housing. They could be first responders, they could be teachers, they could be firemen. They'll be on the same landing as the homeless. The idea is you set a model for the homeless families to aspire to. Children will see the children of other families at a higher income level with prospects. It starts to break the cycle of homelessness.
Yeah, so kind of our ask was for deferral of the school fees. It would, even though it is a $30 million development, and this deferral would be worth about $85,000. So in the grand scheme of the development, it's not a huge sum of money. But we thought it would also give a relationship, and we give the school board kind of a financial interest in the property such that we could work together on any programs that you have or initiatives that you have on housing any of your students or any of the families that come to that you understand are housing insecure or looking for housing. Just kind of wanted to explore that. That was the ask.
Okay, thank you. Board members, do you have any questions or?
I do. So it says that 45 of these units will be reserved for families with students enrolled in Brevard Public Schools. I'm looking at the main. No,
If you go up,
yeah, sorry.
there.
Sorry about
So, I mean, is that a guarantee? Is that a long-term vision? Like, is that written somewhere?
Yeah, yes and yes.
Okay.
It's part of the funding is controlled, part of it comes through the Brevard Homeless Coalition.
Thank you.
And the HUD funding is such that it's only allowed for families that are resident in Brevard.
Yeah, so it would be for families from Brevard County. Now, because we have some other commitments with our other funding, we couldn't guarantee that the unit would only be occupied at all times with, a child that's in a Brevard schools. But certainly we do have, the homeless units that are set aside are 18 one-bedrooms, but we do have 19 two-bedrooms and 8 three-bedroom units that, certainly will house children at some point, and it's a 50-year set aside for the building. So although we couldn't guarantee that at all times it would be students, but certainly majority of the time.
The goal.
Right.
I'm assuming that this is something that's already, it's all done with the city of Cocoa. I've seen the document there with Mayor Blake. I appreciate this just as an educator and as a school board member for Brevard Public Schools because, we have over, I don't know at this point what the number is anymore, but about 3,000 students homeless and in transition. And one of my first experiences as an educator at Harbor City was in the daycare line after school and watching families who legitimately lived in their cars with all of their things packed inside and on top of it come in and day out. And so having affordable housing in communities that are in dire need for that is meeting a need for our students. And ultimately, if we can provide a consistent home for our kids, it's benefiting us as a school system as well, because that stability is absolutely critical, and especially in a city where the median income is about $33,000. So, to me, it's a drop in the bucket. I don't see any red flags. That's why I would have a problem with it, but somebody else might see something I don't. Go ahead.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming and sharing with us, and thank you for the work you're doing. I am in support of, every community trying to find solutions for affordable housing, especially in the area where we live. I very much appreciate that. I wanted to make sure I understood the actual ask, and so our discussion item says that based on the deferral contract, the impact fees, the $87,000, will be deferred with a lien recorded on the property. If the property is sold or no longer being used in accordance with the terms of the contract, not used for affordable housing or including half dedicated to, meeting the needs of the homeless, the educational impact fees become due and payable. But then it says if the developer assuming that means that should be fulfills the terms of the deferral contract for 10 years, the lien will be extinguished. So it kind of says two different things. It says to me, if it's, if it becomes something else than what it was originally intended, then those impact fees are payable. But not if it stays what it's supposed to be doing for 10 years. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that language we actually took from the St. Stephen's Way.
Okay.
So that's kind of where that came from. But as a practical matter, we have a deed restriction from Florida Housing, who's providing the $25 million of the funding. That is a 50-year set aside, and must serve at least 45 homeless families.
Okay, so we're sure that for that 50 years, this is what it has to be done. It can't, even if it's sold to someone else, it will follow that.
Yeah, it runs with the land. So even if it was sold to someone else, it would still be affordable.
Yeah.
Per all the programs.
I'll just share with you and share with the board. I do have a little bit of hesitation, and I haven't had conversations with Ms. Han about this. Talked about it briefly with Dr. Rendell, but I do see a difference between the process that you guys are following versus St. Stephen's Way. It's some of the same work, but St. Stephen's Way from the ground up has been a donation-based work. That getting the property, doing the building, it's been a very slow process. But I know that there's some what's profit and what's nonprofit, and there's coordination between it. But I have some hesitation to do the exact same thing for this project as far as impact fees. One, because we do need those fees. We need those fees for what we're doing next door. We do need those fees for what we're doing for all of our communities across the district. But which includes building schools for the students who are coming in, and including the ones that have needs. But that is my hesitation, is the differences in those two projects. And I'm not saying that can't be overcome in my mind, but I'll just have to have some other conversations. Any input into that that you would have, I would appreciate it, either now or later, or those are some of the questions that I'm having to ask.
No, it's a really good question. You're comparing, private donations to taxpayers, because taxpayers are funding what we're doing, whichever way you describe it. But I think that the level of support that we are going to give the children that are in our thing, because the end result is what is best for the children. We will have a splash pad, we will have a play area, and even though it's still subsidized funding, it is the focus is on protection of the children. And I don't think you'll find any other development in Brevard that's giving the same kind of support for the families that we will be doing in Orchid Lake.
Yeah, and Rob deals with the programs for the homeless units, but kind of the idea is that, because the school board is giving a contribution to the development, that there could be created some type of special relationship where, maybe like with St. Stephen's Way, as opposed to just going through the Coalition of Homeless Providers wait list, that there might be some way to do direct referrals or something. So, I kind of leave that up to the way that works with Rob.
And we are like St. Stephen's Way, that is very locally focused. We know St. Stephen's Way. I know John and the people on the board there. But so is Orchid Way. Jason goes away after a couple of years. He's a developer. It's our property then. We own it. We will, in fact, as soon as before it even opens, we're moving our Rockledge office onto the site. We will operate from there. That will be our headquarters. So it's very much a local operation.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
All right, Mr. Susan.
Yeah, thank you. Just had a couple of quick questions. Can you run that unit breakdown again? So many 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, if you had that?
Sure, yeah. So for the unit set aside for the homeless families, it's 18 one-bedroom units, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 19 2-bedroom, 2 bath, and 8 3-bedroom, 2 bath. And basically the same unit count for the workforce units that are 60% AMI maximum. So for the workforce units, one just needs to income qualify.
Thank you.
To live there.
Next question is towards that workforce piece. You were saying teachers and all these other things, and Sue knows that when that gets mentioned, I get a little excited about some things. Can you explain a little bit more? Is there an application process? Are they going to be applying through with their jobs? Like, how does that work? Explain
Yeah.
that. Or is it just because it's within an income that matches what we have for those jobs? Like, if you can explain some of that.
Sure. So there is a application process, and then, as part of the, filling out a lease application and everything, we do, background checks and things like that. But as part of that is also income verification that goes into the file. And because it's tax credit financed, that's an important part of ensuring compliance with the tax credit regulations. And the Florida Housing comes and audits those files. And so we typically want to see income at least 2.5 times the rental rate to make sure that there's enough income that families can pay the rent. And then there are some maximums. So like for this year in Brevard County at let's say our 60% unit on a 2-bedroom. So let's just say it's a 2-person family in a 1-bedroom. The maximum would be $41,280. And you could we do allow 2 people per bedroom. So on a 3-bedroom, you could have a family as large as 6, although we typically don't see that much. But you could go up to 59,880. And that's on the
Can you
workforce
explain
side.
that max? Does that mean the max that family can make in order to become a part of it?
Yeah, that's the most a family could make. Now, if a family has been there, I think for 2 years, you can make more than that. Because the idea is that you don't
move
want
themselves
to hinder people from, getting better jobs or things like that. And you can stay in the unit, so.
And then that is, so who owns and and I'm sorry, I'm just fascinated by what's happening, right? And I apologize if some of these may go outside the scope.
No, sorry.
Who manages the overall process of what you're saying? Is that your organization, or is that another organization that runs the workforce side?
Both. It's how it worked. Housing Trust Group have a management subsidiary, Housing Trust Group Management, who manage many properties. They will do the for 3 years, they do the day-to-day running of the operation. We take care of the homeless clients, of the homeless residents. We care of them, we provide a case manager, we provide a program director, and we provide this resident services coordinator. After 3 years, we take over the whole property.
So you manage the workforce in the beginning for the first 3 years, he manages homeless, and then after 3 years, you
Exactly.
take over the
You
whole
got it.
thing.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
as the for-profit developer, and we've
Sure.
done, we currently have about 8,000 units, of affordable units in our portfolio, and over the past, 25 years, we've probably done 20,000 units. So we're providing the financial guarantees and the kind of development expertise.
Yeah.
To, physically get the property funded, built. There is a tax credit investor, which is Raymond James contributed about $16 million. The way it works is it's a federal tax credit that then gets sold to private business. So
Right.
typically it's banks that buy into it. So you turn kind of a federal source into a private investment, and then you've got, private business interest involved. And so that's, what helps ensure that the property's maintained. And
Sure.
and the property has to be, kept in compliance and maintained, for 50 years. And the tax credit period is 15 years. So after that, Rob's organization has a right of first refusal to buy out the limited partner.
Got it.
And we're in, just as long as we have to maintain operating deficit guarantees on the property, which is typically 3 years. And since this is, a special needs, primarily special needs property, which, Rob's organization specializes in, and Housing for Homeless already has 90 other units around the county. We're exiting from the partnership, so.
So let me ask you this now. On that workforce side, and even on the homeless side, there's a bare minimum that they pay. Is there an offsetting cost that you guys fill in to pay your organization? So like if I'm on the workforce side and my rent is $1,000 and I pay that, is the federal government subsidizing that and paying
Not
more?
on the workforce side, but the rents are extremely competitive. You're talking of a 3-bedroom at what, 1,300?
Well, yeah, let's see, 60%.
It's around, from 1 to 3-bedroom, it's around 900 up to 1,300. Now you can tell me where you can find a 3-bedroom for
Can't.
1,300 in this
You
county.
can't, and it's ridiculous.
On the
I agree.
on the homeless side, the deal with the housing vouchers, which is what we're getting with the housing authority, they're guaranteed that no tenant ever pays more than 30% of their income ever.
Right.
That's the deal.
That's good.
Doesn't matter what their income is, small or large, they never pay more than 30%.
And then, okay. All right, backtracking just a little bit. All right, so we've got control of the lease, management. When I'm looking at the 41,000 and 59,000, many of our, just so you know, many of our beginning teachers make above 41,000, so they wouldn't qualify on the workforce
Exactly.
side. But you may have some families that have multiple units that may qualify for that. We also have IAs, bus drivers, custodians, everybody else that may want to do that. That's where a lot of this affordable housing comes into play. I appreciate that. I may have some follow-up, but I think I've gone through. Thank you for taking the time to explain that. I appreciate the partnership between public and private. I do. I understand that we need to do this more often. My heart goes out to you for doing what you do for the organizations and stuff like that throughout our county with 90 other units that you're working with, so thank you. I might want some other follow-up, but I just wanted to mention that first.
Thank you. Mr. Trent, do you have questions?
They've been answered so far.
They have, okay. All right, thank you guys for coming and presenting to us today and giving us a little overview. Ms. Campbell, you said it very well. I guess I do have a bit of pause on the deferral, and I'm going to be honest and transparent. I commend what you're doing. I think it's a great need that our community absolutely has. But this application is significantly different than the St. Stephen's Way application and how it came to us. And so that's the part where I just have a bit of hesitation because they came through scraping every penny they possibly could. You guys presented a projected expense with this already in there. One of the other issues that I'm kind of seeing is when we look at this contract for the deferral, on page 4 of this contract, it says that if you transfer this property, that the deferral will only remain in place should it be transferred to another non-for-profit organization. And you're not a non-for-profit right now, and so that seems to almost kind of counter. That's where I'm just having the issue. I understand your why. I 100% do. But there is some things here that just give me a bit of pause, and mainly it's how it was presented versus how the other one was presented and then being so drastically different. I know the community that it serves is the same, and there's a huge need for this, so I support this project 100%, but I just want to be honest and transparent on where I'm kind of having a hiccup on saying, okay, we agree with deferral of these impact fees that you sat through 2 presentations on our capital projects that we have. So you've seen there's a lot of deficit there that we need. So that's where if I'm being honest and transparent with you, where I have a bit of an issue.
Just a quick response on that. St. Stephen's Way aren't the only ones who are scraping for expense. The 30 million did not include not $1 in support of the residents we're putting in there. All the services I talked to you about, we had to go out and find and do the same thing. We had to scrape wherever we could find funding to support those services. So it's not, a complete package. It wasn't. HUD still don't do this. It's a tragedy. They do nothing to support clients once they're in the property.
And one other quick question I had is, once they're there, do they have a year-long lease? And then how long can they qualify under the homeless portion of this? Or is it?
It's called permanent supportive housing, and that's what it is. It's permanent as long as they qualify.
Okay, so it's not like their lease can be extended forever then, so to speak.
No,
Is that
no,
correct? I'm just trying to understand.
It just like our other 90 products, we recertify them once a year. And as long as their income's fine and they've met all the conditions of the lease, then they're fine.
Okay, all right.
But yeah, they're annual leases to start.
They are annual leases.
We do have a culture of trying to motivate them to kind of move on and get into the private market rates. The problem with the county now is the market rates are so high above our subsidized rates, they can't move out. There's nowhere for them to go.
It is a problem. You're 100% correct, because it does almost set up a situation where there is no way out, so to speak, or to better, you know what I mean? Because the rent right now, the average rent is astronomical. So I appreciate you guys tremendously. I may have some more follow-up questions as I kind of go through this and talk with Sue a little bit more. And
Sure.
I'm sure we'll be able to have your contact information. Should we have follow-up questions for them? Is that okay?
Sure.
Yes.
Anytime.
Can I
Yeah,
follow?
One thing to add too, because of the way the tax credit program works, is the actual partnership that owns the property. It can't be a nonprofit, but the general partner, who is Rob, is a nonprofit. So when we applied to Florida Housing for the funding, we actually qualified as a nonprofit application, kind of under the Florida Housing rules. But just because the tax credit is something that will go to somebody's tax liability, which means that they are a for-profit, kind of by definition. Kind of the entity that owns the property isn't 100% nonprofit. But like I say, the general partner is. And at closing, there was a right of first refusal that Rob's Housing for Home has signed. And so the tax credit investor will sell their interest at the end of the tax credit period to Housing for Homeless for $1, and then of course we're exiting before then. So it will at some point become a 100% nonprofit once the tax credit periods run out.
Okay.
Can I follow?
Thank you. I think, Mr. Susan, you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, just real quick, going back to it, because I didn't kind of give you where I was at with things. One of the things that I've recently has come in some of the research that I've been reading is that our number one problem with many of the issues that we deal with in schools is both the family structure and the house that they live in, right? You're being able to provide that house that they live in, which also helps with the family structure. But what I was going to ask you is that when I'm looking at this, between the 19 two-bedrooms and the 8 three-bedrooms, that gives us 27. I know for a fact that area that we have there has 27 parents that have children that are inside of our schools that would qualify. But I didn't hear a definitive, yes, there may be a first right of refusal for parents who have children that are inside your schools to be a part of it. Is that a possibility that we may be able, because you talk about splash pads and everything else, I figure that would be your goal. I was just curious for that.
Absolutely, we will work towards that. You get some pushback from other people with other interests, but yes, the idea would be to try and give priority to local people. It's very much, that's the way we've never had, you hear of this NIMBY, you're familiar, I'm sure, with the phrase NIMBYism. Never happened here. We had Mike Blake as our biggest cheerleader from day one. And because we stressed that it was local and it's going to be for local. So shame on us if we go out now and push it out to a much wider community. It's cocoa for us.
We have a lot of, like Ms. Campbell was saying, the revenue that we receive from certain places goes directly into funding some of those areas, and some of our major funding goes in to support some of the children that are inside that area. If we were asking to offset that from something else, it would be nice to know that the children that we are dealing with are benefiting from that, which would reduce the load that we have on our employees based upon the structure that they're given inside those households. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I just wanted to let you know where my head's at with the approval and stuff like that, so thank you.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of the idea, is that by doing the fee deferral, now the school board has a financial interest effectively in the property. So it should, I would think, and we have to, like I was speaking with Rob on, because we're kind of dealing with multiple different organizations, the Homeless Coalition. But I mean, in my mind, it should give the school board a seat at the table with,
And I would
with
also want to say on the
referrals.
workforce side also, if we could be a part of that.
Sure.
I know that you're saying that there's there, but if I feel like Ms. Campbell was saying, that's $86,000. I know in the scheme of the 30 million, it's not that much because my dad did construction for many years. But for us, it means a lot, right? And for us, I would like to try to squeeze as much as I can out of you guys for my kids, is what it basically comes down to. And I hope you would understand that.
No, I think from a family's point of view, it doesn't matter which unit they're in, whether they're homeless or the workforce, they're going to get the same level of care and attention.
I tell you, my wife, she knows where all the great splash pads are in the multi-county area. And I will tell you, I've visited them many times out in the middle of nowhere. A new splash pad will go in. My wife knows about it. So I know how much that means to families, especially some of the families that need a break. So thank you for innovating this project and getting there. I think for me, it would be having that seat at the table and how that plays out. And I appreciate all your work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you.
And you're all invited to the ribbon cutting.
Okay.
When
is
can
the
we bring our
projected
swim
time of
trunks and be in the
completion?
splash pad?
Sorry?
Can I bring my swim trunks and be in the splash pad?
absolutely,
Or at least my
absolutely.
kids.
That's a no, sir. When is your estimated time of completion for this project?
Right now, it's probably going to be April, May time. So ribbon cutting, well, we're moving into our clubhouse. We're moving into our office.
This year, we're
Office first, but then the buildings will be complete by about, the last building, there's 4 buildings plus a clubhouse. And the last building's complete by June. So ribbon cutting will be April, May time.
Wow, okay. All right, good work.
So
Thank
you
you.
need our approval
Sorry?
pretty quick.
I know, we did it at the groundbreaking, I gave it to him, then it turned into a revival meeting.
I believe that. Thank you, gentlemen.
all
We
right. Thank you very
appreciate
much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if we could take a break while we set up for the next presentation and give everybody a chance to.
Yeah, I think it's
Absolutely. Let's take a 5-minute break. All right.
I would resign.
All right, welcome back. Our next topic is our VPK update. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Ms. Harris and Ms. Chaffee.
Okay. Good afternoon. We are very excited to be here because we watched your off-site workshop and VPK and possible exploring expansion opportunities came up. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Chaffee, our Director of Early Childhood, that some of the things as she works through, we're going to inform you of all the pre-K opportunities. And we are hoping that everyone either here live or that is tuning in will have more clarity because we have a lot of pre-K programs. And so I think sometimes it can get confusing for our stakeholders. So we hope that this provides clarity of what we currently have, what it looks like if we want to pursue some expansion opportunities just from an expense side and the requirements of the state as far as facility and teacher certification. We want to explore that, and then we hope to have takeaways from our board of what you want us to dive deeper into to explore with greater detail for possible expansion so that we can come back in a few weeks with updates of the information that we find based on that.
All right, all right, thank you. Okay, we're going to start with our agenda today, and we'll skip right past it. Okay, there we go. All right, so we're going to start, like Mrs. Harris said, we're going to go over some program descriptions, because when we hear VPK, we think of all of our programs, but we have VPK programs, Head Start VPK programs, we have our pre-K ESE. So we're going to kind of do a deep dive into what those programs look like and where we have those programs. You will see that I've provided everyone a map today. It's kind of an overview of Brevard County, and it has little schoolhouses to show you where we do currently have pre-K programs in our district. So you can see we have them from the north all the way to the south end of the county. All right, so we're going to do that. We're going to talk about our locations, our pre-kindergarten programs and locations, teaching preschool in Florida Public Schools. What are the requirements necessary for our teachers? What are the required elements for a VPK program? Being that the VPK program is a state-funded program, we work with our Early Learning Coalition, and we have funding that comes through them, through the state, and because of that, we have requirements that we have to meet in order to have their programs in our schools. What furnitures and materials are required in our VPK classrooms, and do a little overview of what the expenses look like for that, and recruitment steps to maximize our current enrollment. Okay, so for our program descriptions, first we're going to start with our Step Forward VPK programs. They are a class of 20 children with a teacher to a child ratio of 1 to 10. So in each of our Step Forward VPK classrooms, you'll have 1 teacher, 1 assistant, and 10 students. Children are eligible to attend the program by living in the attendance area of the school. So they must be zoned for the school they are attending for a Step Forward VPK program. Okay. Next, we have our blended VPK programs. Our blended VPK programs consist of 18 children. There's 10 general education students and up to 8 ESE students in those classrooms. Those classrooms, the children do not have to live in the area to be in those programs. We have high school VPK programs. We have 4 high schools that currently house VPK programs, and they are run through our CTE program, and they have 20 children with a ratio of 1 to 10. 1 teacher, 1 assistant, and then there's also high school students in there that are taking it as a CTE class. We have our Head Start VPK program. Head Start is a federally funded program in which enrollment must adhere to family income guidelines. Those classes house up to 20 children also. And then we have our Pre-K VE program, Exceptional Student Education Program, that provides for the educational needs of students with IEPs who are placed according to their home address or designated service school. So that is based on wherever they feel the child's needs will best be met. So now we're going to look at our programs and locations. So we're going to start with our Step Forward VPK. Currently, we have 15 classes in our schools, and here's a list of the schools and the number of classes that they currently have and how many children can be served in those classrooms. So Step Forward can serve up to 300 children currently.
I just want to add for these schools with Step Forward that our district Title I funding offsets that full day. And so this
Okay,
is
yeah.
where we have district funding from Title I that supports this program being full day.
Okay.
Thank you. Then we have our blended VPK. Currently, we have 17 classrooms serving 306 children, up to 306. It shows you the number of children that are eligible to be in the classrooms. It does not necessarily mean that these classes are full. Our Head Start VPK at 19 locations, serving up to 380 children.
And while she's flipping over, I'll just interject, because I know you spend a lot of time with Head Start information, but the reason that this is not that 624 spots is because Head Start also has a 3-year-old program. So for today, we're just talking about 4-year-olds.
And then we have our high school CTE programs at our 4 locations, Merritt Island High, Palm Bay High, Satellite High, and Bear High. And we can have up to 80 children in those classrooms. And then we do have our Head Start 3s. So the Head Start 3s are only 17 children to a classroom. They are fully funded through Head Start. Our Head Start 4-year-old programs, that is funded through Title I and Head Start. Because it's a VPK program, Head Start 3s are fully funded through Head Start. And we have them at 15 school sites, serving up to 255 children.
Those aren't full day, correct?
Yes, they are.
They are full day, okay.
They are full day.
And that's a good question, because our certificates, the state program through the certificates is a 3-hour school day. So we allocate Head Start and Title I funds in order to provide a full school day in
Even
Brevard.
for the 3-year-olds?
Even for the
Okay.
3-year-olds.
Okay. Then we have our pre-K VE. These are programs that are funded through FTE because these children have been staffed into an ESE program. And we have currently 50 school sites or 50 classes with pre-K VE students, serving 557 children in our district. Now, here are our schools that currently do not have a VPK or pre-K VE program. The majority of these schools are not Title I schools, as Mrs. Harris said. In order for us to do the full day for our VPK students, we have to place our Step Forward classrooms in Title I schools in order to get the additional funding to be able to staff the classroom and meet the needs of the full day. We currently have approximately 120 private providers throughout the county that also do VPK. And I know at your workshop, I heard you discuss the private providers. So we do have 120 private providers, and that's changing all the time, but that's an approximate number that we do try to work with the Early Learning Coalition with on, getting information between us and what they do at their programs to have them aligned up with what we do for VPS. So here's kind of an overview of VPK programs. VPK Step Forward, total schools offering the program 12. Step Forward with inclusion, that's where we have a Step Forward classroom, but we have 2 slots in each of those classrooms so we can have an ESE student in them. We have that at 9 sites. We have our blended Gen Ed students at 17, blended X Ed at 17 programs, Head Start VPK 12, Head Start 3-year-olds, 12 sites, CT High School 4, Pre-K VE 37. And itinerant services are where we're meeting the needs of 4-year-olds and possibly 3-year-olds that their parents are, you might have heard them called drive-ins. That's where parents will drive their child to the school. They receive speech and language services or whatever, maybe OT services, and then the parent takes them home. So we currently have 76 children receiving itinerant services that are 4-year-olds. But total, right now, in our schools, we are serving the needs of 1,409 pre-K students. And now we're going to look at our current openings, because like I said, not all of our spots are full. Currently, in our step forward and blended VPK, we have 31 openings across the district. In our CTE VPK high school programs, we have 20 openings. And in our Head Start VPK and 3-year-old programs, we have 34 openings. So we have a total of 85 openings currently for children in our programs.
And this is where, to me, it's going to take a whole village, because we've had to actually move classes, or in some cases collapse classes due to low enrollment, but we know the students are out there. But if you are a first-time parent of a pre-K child, you just may not know that BPS is a provider. And so we want to continue to grow in that area, because we want to ensure that any student with Step Forward, she mentioned that you have to live in the zone, but if we have spots available and you are outside of the zone, we have helped you to get into those programs, just because we want children in the seats behind a certified teacher in our classrooms.
You have a handout that looks like this in front of you, and over on the left-hand side, it'll show you the school. Up at the top of each area, it'll show you whether it's a Step Forward, a blended, or a Head Start VPK program, and it does go to the back. And it will show you, the AR is for the area that it's in, north, central, south, and then it will tell you like what the current enrollment is. It has the date up at the top, because we do track it by the month. And you can see over on the far right-hand side how many open slots we currently have at those schools. Like right now at Cape View Elementary, we have 9 openings.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah.
And can they come in any point in the year?
Yes. Any point in the year. They just have to get their certificate through the Early Learning Coalition or qualify through Head Start and then get a certificate through the Early Learning Coalition. So I thought this would help you see where we have openings. Okay.
Well, it's good to see, really, except for, Cape View being at the top of the list. I mean, there's not a lot of openings.
No, there aren't. It's really just a few spread out throughout the district, but, okay. So what are the requirements to teach pre-kindergarten in Florida public schools? There's a lot of requirements. First of all, the teacher has to have a bachelor's degree or higher from an approved teacher education program to teach VPK in a public school system. Florida certification in one of the 2 areas, either pre-kindergarten, primary ed, ages grade 3 through grade 3, or preschool education, birth to age 4. The first thing they have to do is complete an approved teacher preparation program, including a 10-week field experience in a preschool setting. Step 2, they have to take and pass the required Florida teacher certification examinations, beginning with the general knowledge test, essay subtest, English language skills subtest, reading and math, and take and pass the test for either the pre-kindergarten, primary education, or preschool education, and apply for and maintain the education certificate. They are not allowed to be out of field to teach in our VPK classrooms. You often hear that, oh, that teacher's just out of field for this year. To be in a pre-K or to be in a VPK classroom, the teacher cannot be out of field. They have to be certified.
Conversely, if I'm a private provider and I have a private childcare, they will meet these, the courses, but they don't have to be a certified teacher. And so that's what we really want our community to know too, is our teachers are certified teachers. And I'm not saying that there are not high-quality programs that are private. I'm just saying the bar is very high for who is selected to teach in our pre-K settings due to this requirement in public schools.
So in a little bit, we're going to kind of talk about marketing and how that's one of the things that we need to get out to the community, is that our teachers are certified teachers. Okay, so what does a VPK classroom look like to set up? Furniture and materials to open a VPK classroom. These prices are all current because back with COVID, through the Early Learning Coalition in the state, we received a large grant that enabled us to purchase materials for all of our VPK classrooms to update them according to the state standards, how they wanted them, and that's what the money had to be used for when we received it. So we redid all of our VPK classrooms in Brevard County within the last 2 years. So the furniture.
I sat on that rug on Friday.
I would say all of our VPK classrooms should look just like this. It should be the model you see when you go to your schools and have VPK classrooms. So the furniture is 18,000. The curriculum is 3,700. Learning materials, 8,500. There's a lot of hands-on materials in a VPK classroom. So the cost to set up the room is $30,950. But look how nice it looks. Looks so nice. Okay, so required elements for VPK programs. We are required by the state to meet certain requirements for our outdoor space. 45 square foot of open space per child. The structural equipment, the playground equipment must be appropriate for 4 to 6-year-olds. Many of our schools have 5-year-old playgrounds for their kindergartens, but they aren't necessarily approved for 4-year-olds. So that's something that we always have to look at. Is there a playground that is able to be used by the 4-year-olds? And if you have a 3-year-old program, then you also have to make sure that it's able to be used by your 3-year-olds. Enclosed with fencing, 4 feet or higher, and mulch areas 6-inch deep. You heard Ms. Hahn talking about keeping that mulch raked and everything. That's critical because when they fall, they break. And a designated shade area is preferred. You know, they like the big shade areas, but if not, then you have to have at least a small area where the children can get out of the sun. The indoor space, 35 square foot open space per child in the classroom. Sometimes we hear like, oh, this classroom is big enough. Actually, for the little ones, sometimes you need a bigger space because they have to have the 35 square foot open space per child. There must be a bathroom and a sink accessible in the classroom, and space to have designated learning centers and appropriate size furniture and also appropriate size bathroom facilities. Sometimes the facilities just aren't quite right for 4-year-olds, so we have to make sure that that's appropriate when we're looking at requirements. And
Is this the same for a private provider as it is for us, or this?
for private providers, this is the same.
Same, okay.
Yes, this is the
Thank
same.
But this is where it gets tricky when we're looking at moving programs. It's the playgrounds. The playgrounds become the tricky element because, like Ms. Jeffy said, they could have the kindergarten with the playground.
Right.
But if it's not certified for the 4-year-olds, then we're talking with Sue about, you know, where is there 40,000 for a playground?
And that's where I have that
Yes.
right there. New playground with ground cover is approximately $40,000, and that's if you don't have to remove an old playground. If you have an old playground, we had that at one school right now where we're having to remove a playground, then you have to add in the cost of that and then fixing the ground and everything in order to put in the new playground. So playgrounds are very costly. Okay, so right now, when we look at our schools that are below 85% capacity, because when we're looking at where could we put a new VPK, well, you have to have the space in a school. So currently, these are our schools that are below 85% capacity with our K through 6 children. The only school up there that's Title I currently is Apollo Elementary. So the only place that we could look at possibly starting a new VPK using Title I funding would be Apollo at this time. The other schools, we would have to look at some other way to do the funding sources.
And as you look at that list, that's where we want to, you know, just highlight some areas that we can explore. So some districts go to half-day so that you're looking at what is the funds generated off the certificate and what would be the offset of Fund 100. Some do fee-based programs where parents are, you know, paying for the aftercare, and you see that a lot in the private sector. So a private sector may say, okay, you can come for the 3-hour, but then it's XYZ dollars to pay. So we could explore some fee-based opportunities. And then we could also look at generating sessions. So we would have a morning session and an afternoon session. And so parents would select, I want my child to go to the afternoon session, so it's 5 days a week. But the combination of that, now that does bring some challenges, as you can imagine. But those are just some of the possible options that we would be able to explore and get more data, with Apollo being the only one that we have a funding source that's allowable to offset that full day.
And one other thing is that we always have to consider is that we have to look at what does the enrollment look like in the, you know, the future enrollment at a school, because if they only have one classroom available and we think that in a year, there's a new neighborhood going in or something and that their enrollment is going to increase for their K through 6 children, we would need those classrooms possibly for K through 6, and then we'd have to relocate the VPK because K through 6 have, access to our schools first. All right, you also in front of you have a funding and expense in a VPK classroom sheet. This isn't on a slide, but it just shows you for our VPK hours, a VPK child attends school we get now, like Ms. Harris said, we have half-day programs and whole-day programs with VPK and our private providers. We do a full-day program, but we only get money for 540 hours of a child attendant in VPK. And we get $5.42 per hour, so it's $2,926 per year for a child to attend our VPK programs. And so if you look across the top, it shows you by classroom, that's $58,000 for a class of 20 children that we bring in. So that's when you're looking at the teacher salary, and then we have an IA in the classroom. That's why we use the Title I funding. So we also have some just, expenses that we incur throughout the year. All of these expenses are through our Title I grant currently, because the VPK dollars go to salaries. So all the other expenses currently for our VPK programs either come from Title I grant funding or through Head Start. Our pre-K ESC, that funding comes from, like I said earlier, FTE dollars. Okay, and then finally, recruitment steps to maximize enrollment. Having over 80 openings currently, what can we do to get the word out better? We want all seats filled. We want all seats filled, especially if we're thinking about looking at expanding. We want to fill the seats we currently have first. So how can we do that? Well, we can work through our Early Learning Coalition. Priscilla Danino, our coordinator with our VPK coordinator and early childhood coordinator, she is on the board with the Early Learning Coalition. So she is our direct connect to them, and she works tirelessly with them to try and get the word out about, to the community. But we want to do more. And we have, some ideas over here for, we do our school marquees when we do our kindergarten transition and kindergarten orientation and our VPK registration, but we want to continue that and get more out on our web pages and Facebook. We already do have a great partnership with Government Community Relations. We want to do more through our Thrive by 5 to help parents know how to go to the Early Learning Coalition and get that certificate so they can get their child involved in our VPK programs, and use other means of communication through the district to get parents in our, into our programs.
I think too, when we think of, the impact that VPK programs have on school readiness, like we have a lot of research behind that, but if you spent time in a school, you can tell the difference between a child who has had a schooling experience and one who has not yet had that by kindergarten. But when I think of, the achievement gap is very small in kindergarten. And I know later we're going to talk about some data, but I can't help but think of the game changer we could provide for students that are entering kindergarten, which is their first formal experience, that just when they know how to do school, they understand that, there's going to be times where we have to do things we don't want to do. It's the social interactions. It is the learning through play. That it's an environment that just readies them for, there is such a thing as letters and sounds and all of those foundational skills. And when I think of how to get into our communities so that we're making sure, especially in those schools where we have readiness rates that are not where we collectively want them to be yet, and I think of the parent that it's their first child. I know we've talked, and if it's my first child, I don't even know what the school system offers. And I think this is why we're trying to get into our faith-based settings. We're trying to get to our community stakeholders. Every time you see a little one, I remember at Clear Lake at the back-to-school event, a little boy with a backpack, you know, that was falling off his back. He couldn't even hold it up. And I said, where are you going to school? And he's like, I'm not. This is my brother's backpack. Right there, making a connection with mom. Guess what? You're 5 minutes away from a pre-K setting, you know, that has space. And so just really making sure that it's yes, we want to expand, but we also want to make sure that we're spreading this word so that every Brevard 4-year-old knows that there's potential spot for them.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Board members, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I very much appreciate all the information, and some of it's review, but some of it is new, and just having it all collectively in one place, because we have so many different ways of doing it. I will just share with you, you know, from our conversation that we had at our offsite and all along the way, as far as expansion of VPK, to me, my vision of that is not necessarily that we have a VPK in every school. Obviously, we couldn't do that. We don't even have a space for that. But that we really focus in on those schools where we are seeing that kindergarten readiness that's not there. And so to me, that is a priority for me, rather than looking at these schools that don't have one and say, where can we put one, except for Apollo. If we've got room at Apollo is a Title I school. I'm saying I think we need to look at Apollo. Because that is a high needs community. But, you know, like, let's take the University Park area. Do we have room to put, I know we already have Head Start there. I think we've got VE. I mean, is there a need, wherever there's need, can we do another classroom in an area? And I don't know if University Park is a good example, because they do already have several classrooms, but where is the need? And let's put additional resources there, because that's where the payoff will be in the kindergarten readiness and the learning to read. And in addition to, you know, I was just thinking about the behaviors, because we talked about the vast increase in behaviors in our youngest learners because they don't know how to do school. And if we can get them into pre-K and just kind of get that learning how to do school, I absolutely support that. The only other thing that I would say that if there's something we can take a look at, and maybe this is something, I've not got any interest in competing with other VPK providers. My kids went to First Baptist Melbourne's VPK, which I loved and adored. I mean, it was an amazing program. You know, I mean, there are schools going out to, but there's plenty of kids to go around. So I absolutely support any efforts to try to help families navigate the process, because it is more complicated than I feel like it needs to be to get that certificate and then go take it where you're supposed to go. Anything we can do to help families, and then also to explore potentially for families, if there's even a desire or need out there could we do a half day? I love the idea of split. I know it could be complicated, but like a morning, afternoon, you know, those families are probably going to be in an affluent area. But if it's something that we could do, I like the idea of exploring a half-day option for families who have that desire.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Ms. Jenkins?
Yeah, so forgive me, because I legitimately have notes like scribbled all over in randomness here, so sorry. First and foremost, I appreciate you doing this work and doing it so quickly, since I feel like I brought this up like 3 weeks ago. Obviously, this is a passion of mine, and I know that you were paying attention to that workshop, so I appreciate this broad display of what we've got going on, because that's step one. We need to know what we have in the first place before we can talk about expanding or potentially adding things in certain areas. And so what I had proposed was, hopefully, and like Ms. Campbell just said, is maybe we can pilot in a specific community, and I know it's a choice system, but I'm going to call it a feeder line, because traditionally most of these students that go to certain elementary schools are going to a certain middle school, going to a certain high school. And the ones I was talking about was University Park, Riviera, and Palm Bay Elementary, to kind of kill multiple birds with one stone. So like we already mentioned, we already can identify with data certain communities where they are when it comes to their VPK assessments, even when they're taking them out in those daycare sites and those community VPK sites. So if we can put together, and this is of course if there's a majority of support for this, a presentation that looks at that area and those specific zip codes to the facilities that are in there, what their performance is, what those VPK assessments are showing in terms of our kindergarten readiness for those kids that are coming in. I feel pretty confident in what it's gonna say. I spent a couple of years in and out of every single one of those facilities almost, and I have opinions on many of them. So what we would probably see if we can give better access to VPK services for those communities is a decrease in kindergarten behavior, a decrease in those learning gaps like we already had talked about. When there's significant deficits in kindergarten, you have a student who may not have even had access to books or have any idea what a letter is, sitting next to kids who have sight words, you're already creating this negative perception with school, and you're gonna lose them from there forward. So hopefully that can increase literacy rates and improve our K-3 reading scores in those communities. Ultimately, if a family has entered BPS in VPK, they already are establishing, we hope, a positive relationship with our public schools, but also the likelihood of them staying in our public schools has been dramatically increased. And the reason I care about looking at a pilot program in this area is not just because there's a need and because we can target academically and socially and benefit the community, but because, like I had mentioned in our previous workshop, when we got our CTE presentation, Palm Bay High School and Stone Magnet Middle were on the top of the list when it came to students leaving and going to charter and private schools. So if we can stop doing this top-down approach, like we keep doing, and trying to attract students to come back or stay in our schools, we should be doing a bottom-up approach where we are greeting them at the door from the very beginning of their educational experience with positive things, setting them up for success, and making them want to stay in our schools in the first place. So I think that would help there. Other things to consider is, and it depends on, you know, if this was to be something to dive deeper into, if this was where we could pilot extra. I don't know if there's space in those schools. If there's not space in those schools, is it something that we can look at where there's other programs in that school that could maybe be moved to a different school? Are there, is there a VEB program in that school that potentially could be housed somewhere else so we could make room for a pre-K program in that community instead? Another thing to think about too is working with the pre-K ESE itinerant services department to find out where there is a cluster of students that they're servicing. Could we then justify why we might need one of those classrooms at one of those schools in that community versus paying an employee to go all around to service those students? Maybe we should be having those students serviced right there at BPS. Let me see.
Can you repeat the three schools? Sorry, you said Palm Bay, University Park, and what's the third one?
Riviera, and I'm just,
Riviera, okay, thank you.
And
I
like
just-
from an analysis, that might not be the right choice, but that's just from my gut, that's what makes the most sense. And ultimately too, I mean, to do a community survey, to ask the community and the parents out there, you know, are you thinking of choosing BPS for VBK, or why didn't you choose BPS for VBK? And one of the things that we can't ignore is often, and this is just from my personal experience going to those daycares and VPKs, I'm just gonna tell it like it is, a lot of them are really low quality. I wouldn't wanna send my own child there, ever. That's what's there. Sometimes that's all that's affordable, or sometimes that's all that's available, or sometimes it's the only thing they can have with aftercare. And I know that we can't just have aftercare for pre-K, like that's a magical thing we can do here. But if we're looking at a pilot program, can we consider just looking into what could we do in those schools to potentially offer aftercare just there? Because those communities significantly need that in order to choose our VPK program, to see what that does. Again, this is going to be an investment. It's going to be at a negative cost for BPS, I'm aware of that. But in the long run, I argue that it actually is a cost benefit. So statistically and data-wise, when you intervene with early childhood intervention, you spend less money on remediating those students throughout their elementary and middle school years. You identify students sooner if ESE service needs, and then the sooner you get them those needs, the shorter amount of time they spend with those needs, and you end up saving money there. And I argue if this plan worked for a small community pilot program, and we kept those kids in our schools and we kept them in the long run to come to our middle schools and to our high schools, we're actually going to be gaining that FTE for that student who isn't leaving us in the long run. Of course, you can't prove that off the bat, which is why I'm proposing we work on a small community pilot program versus throughout the entire district. And I'm with Ms. Campbell too. I mean, if we have a Title I school that doesn't have a VPK, let's make that happen. Okay, thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. Sorry, I just had a million notes written down.
All right, Mr. Susan.
Yeah, just one of the things that I'd like to do is that having as many kids in this age group that I do, there's been a couple of times where I've gotten a lot of, you know what I mean? What I receive is cards to the house saying, hey, we have pre-K available and all these other things, right? On top of that, they have tours and stuff like that. So what I did was I just kind of went through my mind real quick over what we receive, and then I would just try to share it with you guys. We always get letters back from the parents. There's always tours of their facility available. I don't know if we do that currently, but not just right before the decision making, but catching them 6 months to 8 months prior to them making the decision. Rather than us competing, we can already get in a seed in their heads. When I say letters to the parents, I'm getting it so somehow they're pulling and knowing that my kid is of age for them to get it. I don't know where they get that, but I think Miss Jenkins had mentioned that there is a way to get that information. The other thing is that there is a pushback in the community of people that go to the private schools, that the curriculum is too over the top and it doesn't allow kids to allow themselves to become a part of the school and feel comfortable and stuff like that. That is not the reality, but that is what is out there, right? So through a communication campaign with maybe videos and stuff like that, focusing on, hey, we have certified teachers, we have, you know what I mean, achievement levels that we have that show from our children that are coming out of our schools, show a better return in some way. The social preparedness, right? These students are socially prepared more, they're achieving better, you know, and setting them so that their first year is easier. So those are some of the things that I think would help target a parent who's trying to make that decision. The other thing is I was going to ask, is there a committee that meets or a group that meets, kind of like the private schools meet with Ms. Campbell, but is there a pre-K committee that meets with all the pre-K providers in the county? Like, do we pull them all together and say, hey guys, let's talk? Do we do that at all?
I attend a monthly meeting with all directors of private providers through the Early Learning Coalition.
Okay, so it's through the Early Learning Coalition that does that. Great. Okay, because the next thing that I was going to say is one of the things that I thought would be a great idea that I was talking to my wife about last year was that we work with some of them to provide tours of the families while they're in the private schools. Let me explain. So I may have a kid that's in pre-K or in kindergarten still that's part of a private school, but we go and we offer up for those schools that have that cap at kindergarten for their children to take tours of our schools that are local for them, meaning that we catch them 6 to 8 months out ahead so that we're targeting them so that they're comfortable with the move. A lot of times people they like drive by, they see the marquee, but they don't see the internal workings. I think that would be a good way to attract some of that first year, like kids that make decisions into the charter schools, and we may be able to capture them for the K through 8. And that's pretty much all I had. Thank you.
Mr. Trent.
That's good. Don't quite possibly know if there could be a question left out there. However.
Welcome to Vice Chair.
It is. Yeah. If there's a Title I school that doesn't have one, absolutely, I think you got it. We've got to get that done ASAP. And with all the marketing that's, between Matt and the rest of the board here has mentioned, I'm sure you have your head's probably spinning. But it is a great presentation. It shows that we have a number of opportunities out there for our students and our families, and you're always going to get thumbs up from us to do whatever you absolutely think of that may help attract more students and families. You have our support. Again, thank you.
Thank you. I do actually have a couple questions, and so I'm gonna go with this, the VPK enrollment, and because I don't know the answers, I'm gonna ask the questions. No such thing as a stupid question. I can gather on some of these that it looks as though maybe a VPK class has collapsed into another one. I'm looking at like Fairglen's numbers, and some of these numbers vary. Now, during the summer months, as far as enrollment, that makes sense. Obviously, it's summertime, so children typically travel with families. But why such a drastic difference? When we look at Cape View, for instance, I mean, well, I guess they've always had a big variation there. But it seems like it just,
June
Yeah.
and July is on here, but that is just during that registration. So that is for that month, here's how many students are registered. So
Okay.
the June and July would be to before, but you are correct. When the school is starting, that what happens sometimes is people realize school has started when they start seeing the buses.
Right.
So in some settings, you will see a delayed entry. And I know that sounds significant, but I can tell you we have schools that gain 100 students 4 weeks into the school year.
Right, and so that's good. That's what I kind of wanted to hear on what's happening there, because I think that just goes back to effective marketing, right? So if we get ahead of them and we're making them aware that this is something that's available in the community, and I shared with you guys earlier my story on my own personal children. I'm like, I'm very involved, and I'm having to figure out and navigate through this early learning coalition. How do I sign my child up for this? And I'm sure there are many other parents that feel that same frustration. So if we could figure out a way to market more effectively to these potential students, I think that's huge. I think obviously if we have a Title I school that doesn't have a VPK program, we need to make sure we get that established. One question I had though, as far as the Title I eligibility goes, what happens if a school loses Title I eligibility and they have a VPK program? What do we do there?
Usually we can grandfather the program in for the following year, but then after that, we will have to move the program unless we find a different funding
It's fine.
source.
Okay,
We used to have a program at Roy Allen, and Roy
Okay.
Allen lost their Title I. We were able to keep it there for one additional year, and then we had to move the program.
okay.
Which is
Apollo was
unfortunate
not
because
on
there's
the
a lot
border.
of schools, there's a
They're
lot of schools that
secure.
are on the edge of Title I that don't receive it, that still should be Title I.
So that's the information I would like to see is what schools do we have that are really close, within a very close percentage of maybe losing it one way or the other, because I think that needs to be on our radar. So we're aware if we have a school that's going to potentially look at losing a VPK unit coming up. But yeah, honestly, I think the expansion of the VPK is tremendous. I think it'll pay dividends that we can't even really, we won't really even be able to fully comprehend them until probably 10 years down the road, unfortunately, but that's just the way it goes. It's planting a seed. We'll see what it cultivates. I think it would be good for Brevard County overall, but I'm excited. Thank you for this data. It's very, very informative. I'm excited about how we're going to move forward and do big things in this arena. So I appreciate you ladies.
Thank you.
That's right. May I follow up real quick?
Yes, go right ahead.
So also too, when you were talking about why is that number changed, not only the buses, like that's legitimate, but also because it's the first time they're really dealing with school, some of these
Right.
families, they're very confused about the birthday cutoffs too. So that always there's always like this weird beginning stage section too. So I guess I just wanted to get a consensus from the board, because when I brought this up in the workshop, I mean, I was really adamant about what my long-term hopes were. Again, like it's not like my passion. Sure, I would love every single school to have a VPK, totally. But I don't think that's where the biggest bang for a buck is. You know, when we're looking at this list of the schools that don't have them, you know, quite frankly, most of those were in my district, and I feel very comfortable saying that most of those don't need them. And they have plenty of community daycare sites that are fantastic and adequately affordable for that area. And so I don't think us investing our money in those places really makes the most sense. And so I guess what is the appetite of the board to continue to even just explore the option of a pilot program in the South Melbourne and Palm Bay area to that feeder chain concept, just to see what that would look like and what they could even possibly pull off over there? What are you guys thinking? And the one thing too, Mr. Susan brought up, I think would be interesting if there is a majority to explore. When you look at those VPK assessments from those sites, the community sites, it would be interesting to compare them to what the scores are at the local schools.
It's just there's no testing till it's difficult.
Yeah.
I'll jump in there. I'm 100% okay with exploring it. What I would want to see, though, is those specific sites that you've identified. A couple of them on here, I'm going to use Palm Bay, for instance, because that one's showing a vacancy of 4 spots. And then, I don't know, this is on the blended unit. There's a couple of them that have vacancies currently, but I would also like to see that in conjunction with maybe looking at the overall, I don't know how to say this the wrong way, the behaviors. If we have a huge amount of behaviors in the kindergarten area, let's look at that, right? And then maybe that be an area that we focus on. We need to get ahead of it and start a VPK program there so these students are ready for school. And I don't know if it may very well be the ones that you named, but I'm not aware of that, so I'm sure they would be able to give us that information.
Yeah, so the the vacancies, they're really minimal. Like when you have 1, 2, 3, sometimes that's also because kids like move out. But the vacancy of 4 is in the blended program for Palm Bay Elementary. And I would argue that's a different kind of program. It's a little bit harder to market to families. And so that's something I would have them consider as well too. Like maybe we can move that program and put in a different kind of VPK program that might be more palatable to more families. I don't know, just something for them to think about.
Dr. Bias and I work closely together on each year looking at where our blended programs are and what the needs of our students are and, you know, moving them accordingly for the upcoming school year. So we do work on that.
Whether it's, this is an area, this is a high needs area, this 3 schools that you mentioned are definitely surrounding a high needs area. To me, it's gonna come down to, I'd like us to, if we're gonna pilot something, I don't know if I can truly call it a pilot because we're already doing all these things. But if we're gonna change something, it seems like the things that we can do the quickest, let's take that easy bite to apple. And some of these schools that already have programs, already have the playgrounds established. We won't have to do that. We will have the setup, right, to add another classroom to. But also these particular schools, in addition to Apollo, I really like to see some Apollo. I think we're all like in favor of
got
that.
that down. That's what we
You got that written down. You know, they already have the infrastructure set up. We know there's high needs in the community. I think we're going to see the behavior needs also in the same, and I appreciate that you bringing that up. And also, I think we're going to have capacity, except for not Riviera.
Well, and that's kind of what I meant by, because
Yeah.
I'm not
So
gonna pretend
wherever
I know
we can
every
get
school
it,
by
wherever
heart.
we can get it done
'Cause you can
realistically, I think that makes the most sense. Because the need is there in areas, but if we have the capacity, space-wise, to do it too. You know, I appreciate I had a meeting with Ms. Dampier early last week, and she was talking about aligning where our VE classrooms are with where they would be once they get out of VPK, so that we're not moving kids after VPK. So once we kind of have that shift around, we may actually have some space where we didn't have space before. So if we can do that in conjunction with those decisions, that seems to make sense to me.
If we expand programs at already existing schools like Sherwood, Creel, and all that stuff, we can just add classrooms and stuff like that. I think in some cases, just so you guys know, there already exists a pipeline and a feeder provider network. So I don't have any problem expanding it. That's what our goal was. But I'm going to work with you guys in my areas to expand those and drive more participation by some of the individuals that I think we could add to it. That's
Yeah,
it.
because that central Melbourne area is a high needs area too.
So our takeaways that we're going to go off and do some work and come back shortly and address is the Apollo issue. So we'll be looking at, do they have the capacity to meet those requirements that Mrs. Chappie, but we agree with you. All of our Title I schools, and Apollo is not one of those schools that's on the cusp of Title I. And then we'll look at the pilot, looking at K behavioral data, and also what programs, just at a glance, the Palm Bay, right now we have the blended and we have the Head Start. So Head Starts, you know, the child has to qualify. They don't have to live in the zoned area. And then blended, as Mrs. Chappie shared, that's going to have seats in it for students with exceptionalities and gen ed. But what we don't have is, we want to see, is there an appetite that we could have a traditional step forward? So then I live in that zone, but maybe my family does not meet the poverty rate for Head Start, and there's not a seat in the blended. And so we want to have an avenue for families in that community that just may not meet those poverty or the exceptionality criteria.
100%. Or maybe they do, but the program's full.
Correct, correct.
And then a
Yeah, but I
marketing
think
campaign.
what we'll do is we'll look at a couple different feeder chains.
Groupings.
Yeah, just to see what makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
That might be one, there might be another.
I think it would also be smart of us to look at the surrounding VPK options that are out there. So
Right.
if you look at a community and there's 25 right there, I mean, we don't obviously want to maybe start one there, didn't make the most sense, so.
Wherever there's a VPK desert.
Right, yeah, where's the
Yes.
VPK desert at? Yeah.
So I would like us to consider, because there's a lot of them, I would like us to consider the VPK assessment data too, in terms of like quality, just because, I'll talk to you about that off the camera. The other thing too is our VPK programs for the CTE high schools, those are super difficult to staff because their schedules are super wonky and weird. And sometimes parents are really uncomfortable sending their kids, 4-year-olds, onto a high school campus. But I think if there was this more natural push in a smaller area, easier to market, things of that nature, you might get someone who comes in that might want to go there, they just didn't understand it or know about it. So hearing more about it being in the community in the first place might fill up those seats at that CTE program too.
And I think to that point is, just because we know from, our previous work, those CTE settings, there wasn't always as much collaboration across, and now we have a director of early childhood, and so bringing those, whether you're a CTE program, Step Forward, or blended, that we are all collaborating as a Brevard VPK program, and so that there aren't so many pockets. So what we're marketing that we're marketing
Right.
across the board.
We also could put district charter schools inside of a lot of our faith-based schools to compete with and draw some of the people who go to those churches already and feel comfortable in those areas. You can put in a VPK program there that would then feed to one of our schools or does a transfer while it's there. So there's all kinds of good options. Thank you.
Okay, we'll be
All right,
back
thank
soon.
you so much. Appreciate you guys. All right, we are on to our next topic, which is the student achievement update.
And Ms. Wright, I know I'm usually the one that makes sure we have time to eat, but this is a really important presentation, so I would recommend that we make sure we give Ms. Francis the time that she needs to get this information out to us. And we want to discuss it more tonight, but this is really important.
I know, and usually we set a time certain stop so that we have an hour in between. And Mr. Susan, the two topics that you, okay, all right, what's your, all right.
And while Ms. Francis is passing out some handouts for you, we just want to keep reiterating this for all stakeholders that we were so excited to get PM2 data because remember last year was the first year of the test, did not have comparative data. Well, in full honesty, PM2 is not able to be compared to PM2 like we had hoped. And let me explain that to you. So last year was our first year doing PM1, PM2, PM3.
Right.
Then, we got informational grades back in November, December. Well, then the new cut scores were created. So what the state did is they went back and retrofitted, and Ms. Francis, you pipe up if I'm misspeaking, but our PM3, based on those new cut scores, they went into the FAST portal and changed the scoring so that it matched the new cutoffs. So if I'm a parent, I can log in and see with the new cutoff scores of last year, I can see where my child performed. So we're very thankful that happened for PM3 because as a parent, I want to see at the end of the year with this new cutoff score. But they did not go back and do that for PM2. And so I can't take a 492 from last year and a 501 and really say that there's an incremental growth because now that is apples to oranges. So before we start off, I just want everyone to be clear. What we are going to dive into today is what we do know is finite and static, is how much growth our children made between PM1 and PM2 last school year and how much growth they made between PM1 and PM2 this year.
Okay.
What we are doing and working with schools, and Ms. Francis is working with schools on learning gains, looking at last year's PM3 data to where we are now to say, how close are we to where we ended the year? Because if we want higher than we wanted, what we received last year, we know that as a target. But I just need to, when we go into PM2 to PM2, it's not apples to apples.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Sorry, I need my glasses. So today's comparison, like Ms. Harris said, we're going to look at the comparison of PM1 to PM2 and PM1 to PM2 for 22 and then 23 and subsequently. And one of the things that I get asked a lot, and that's the reason that it's on there, is what are the expectations? And the expectations from the state of Florida, and it's in statutory language, that the students take progress monitoring 3 times a year. So that's why the test is not only called the Florida Assessment of Student Thinking, they also call it Coordinated Screening and Progress Monitoring System, because we want to make it really long. It's for ELA and for mathematics. So we're going to start with looking at the K2 data. And when I spoke with Ms. Harris, Renaissance provides a lot of different reports, and not all of them can be comparable. And the reason that we say that is because when they change the scales, although they have a unified scale and they also have the regular scale that has been linked to the FSA, or I'm sorry, to the FAST, in their wisdom, they did not do that in the site. So they're still comparing they're using the unified scale. So we decided to go with the student growth percentile growth. And what that does is it looks at the relative growth for students in the same grade level. So it compares the students themselves, and it's saying, based on you, and you're compared to other students, are you scoring above the 35th percentile? If you're scoring above the 35th percentile, then you're expected to make that the growth, the typical growth that is expected for 1 year.
And that's where, and luckily we've worked together long enough, so we're going to kind of tag team
Yes.
for this. But that's where it's important is what we are looking for, are you on track to be proficient? And so sometimes when you're comparing yourself to your peers' growth, well, it's all based on that subset of students. And so what we are looking at is what we have learned from looking at this data. If you are in the 35th percentile, and continue to stay there, that you should be proficient. And that's where this scale number of 852, that is the number that we have said, you know, if you're scoring at an 852 for first grade, the likelihood of you being ready to go and proficient is good. We can't say exact because we don't know how you'll be at the end of the year, but that is the number and that percentile ranking that we're looking at.
The other thing that the 852 is utilized for is to determine, and the reason I wanted to give you these brief reminders is because when we look at the total number of students tested in mathematics, it looks like it's a lot higher, and you'll see it in the next slide, than it is for those in, let's say, early literacy versus the reading, the STAR reading. And that is because the 852, if a student scores an 852 in PM1, in kindergarten, then they're moved to STAR reading. If they score an 852 in first grade, they're moved to STAR reading. But if they're not, they continue on until the first graders must attempt a PM3, the STAR reading. Second graders must take the STAR reading for both all three PM1, 2, and 3. However, if they don't meet the 852 or they can't get through the test, then those second graders will then attempt to take the assessment at the STAR Early Literacy. So it's not, we can't say that all first graders took one assessment and not the other. So that's why I wanted to give you that brief explanation.
That is so complicated.
It is, I was just going to say, it's as clear as mud, and here's why our stakeholders are confused.
Yes.
Never, what I have loved about FAST and this progress monitoring is that we finally, you know, when I think of grades 3 and up, I can say who is on grade level, who is not.
Yes.
At 3 times, because they're getting grade level assessment right in front of them, and we have that data. When we're looking at this first grade, I will tell you, because that is the critical year, if you've spent time with me, like that is the game changer for third grade. First grade, you could have students she's taking one test, I'm taking another. And so parents, it's very confusing because you're looking at the score based on the assessment you're taking, if you're in literacy or reading. By PM3, every first grader gets PM3. So there's a lot of conversation, as you can imagine, because if I've spent time in PM1 and PM2 around with literacy, I'm getting forced into PM3, ready or not. But at least.
Are the tests anywhere close to similar? Because what I'm hearing sometimes is the test, and maybe it's more of the second grade test going to third grade test, just the format is so different. So many students have to overcome the differences. So among these two, are they formatted differently so that students step into a new test and then they're at a disadvantage because they haven't taken that kind of test before?
So these are very similar, and I'm speaking only according to what the research that Renaissance has provided us, and we've invited them to meet with the directors a couple of times, and we're hoping to bring them back again to do a little more training. What they have said is that the student growth percentile, that is the closest that you can use to compare when a student was a PM1 first grader and took the early literacy, but then they met that 852, and then took PM2, they took the STAR reading. So according to them, according to what they have said to us, is that growth model, when they're comparing those like students to determine that growth model, specifically for a student.
And Mrs. Campbell, to your point, it's very significant changes between what they're seeing in second grade. Total
Yes.
different vendors. So they're seeing one assessment type as a second grader, and then when they move into third grade, it's very, very different.
Yes.
And you will see that even in our data. I remember last year, celebrating and feeling great about some of that second grade data, and then we did PM1 third grade, same students, and it's very significant changes in their experience.
So they're both supposed to be computer adaptive. This is a different, the adaptivity for this one is a little bit different, and I'm not as familiar with it as I am with the way that it is adapted for 3 through 10.
Because this adaptation goes down into foundational skills, where once you hit third grade, it adapts, but only within your grade level band. So it never dips below grade level. As she moves to these slides, I'm going to say that's when the handout will come in handy, because we're going to go over 22, 23 data. Then the next slide's going to be the 23, 24. And you're going to want to, again, we're looking at growth between PM1 and PM2, not the number proficient 2 to 3.
We just didn't want to muddy the waters any more than we needed to by putting them side by side, because then people would tend to assume that you can compare them. So what this one is showing is the comparison of the fall to winter, 22, 23, and then fall to spring. And as you can see, when you compare, and then when you're looking at the fall to winter 23, 24, you'll notice that we are up 4 percentage points. And I gave you the total number of students that were included. So you'll notice that there was a little bit of a dip. Again, that's the reason for that explanation at the beginning, because could that be attributed to the number of students that moved from STAR reading to STAR early literacy? So that's why I gave you all of the precursor information. I'm hoping that by next year, when we get the PM3 data, we'll be able to look more at either the unified scale compared to what is the scale that is tied to FAST. For the mathematics, you'll notice the same thing. We'll notice that we're 11 percentage points up from when compared to last year. And from last year from the fall to the spring, they increased 4 percentage points. And this is the STAR early literacy, and these are your youngest students. And it's, again, Brevard is up 4 percentage points from last year compared to this year. And between winter and spring, there was a 5 percentage point increase. So this is where the fun begins. Okay, so it looks like it's overwhelming, but the first thing I want you to notice, this is the 22-23 data. First column is PM1, second column is PM2, and third column is PM3. You'll note that in every single case, our students improved from PM1 to PM3. The most significant increase was for third graders between PM2 and PM3, which was a 27 percentage point increase.
You want to flip to that slide too. So this is like the glance at last year, and then if you flip
Yeah,
to
no,
the
but I'm only
next
covering
year's.
what happened last year, so I'll move into that. And then, so when you're looking at all the grade levels last year, they all increased by double digits. So that's great news for last year. So now what's important to keep in mind is what was the growth between PM1 and PM2 last year? So that was a 7 percentage point growth. So when we look at the next slide, and we note the same thing, we note that all of our students have improved from PM1 to PM2. We also note that third grade has a 19 percentage point increase, which is the highest for them for all. But the thing to keep in mind is the average growth from PM1 to PM2 was 9 percentage points. So if you recall what I said here, it was a 7 percentage point increase overall, where now we're seeing a 9 percentage point increase.
And I just have to highlight specifically third grade, because this is the first year that that is part of school grade. And so our schools have really stepped up. Our third grade teachers, last Saturday, we had almost 70 here. They are really showing up for their students, and their students in turn are showing up for them. So that kind of growth in third grade is remarkable. Other highlights would be just, again, looking at the amount of growth is, sixth grade, seventh grade. We do have, when we look at our ninth and 10th, a little bit of flat or a reduction in growth. And so we know we have still work to do.
Right.
But I feel like with third grade being such a pivotal grade, this year being part of our new school grade equation, this shows promise.
Yeah.
Another significant point to note is that all grade levels were above where they were for PM2 in 22-23. So that's significant.
Yeah.
We're doing better.
It's good. We're
Yes.
doing a lot better.
We still have work to do on some other pages. So
Okay.
ELA.
Don't get too excited.
Just being fully transparent, but we do have a lot to celebrate.
So the official demographic data is not available. So what I did was I used the big file that is released by the state, and we put it into a big giant data mining thing so that we can give you some, technical terms, so that we can provide you with how are our subgroup doing. And we also included the multiracial. The last time I spoke with you, I said that I would start including the multiracial group because it continues to grow faster. So when we look at our subgroup data in 22-23, we note that every single subgroup made an increase. Our African American students from PM1 to 2 increased by 5.6 percentage points, our Hispanics by 6.8, our multiracial by 7.1, our white students by 7.3, and overall a 7.0 increase. So when we're looking at comparing, again, 22-23 to 23-24, it's critical to remember that 7 percentage point increase, because when we look at the next slide, these are the same subgroups. Now we're looking at a 7.3 percentage increase for our African American students, so that means our African American students are performing better. So our Hispanic students at a 7.5, our multiracial at a 9.5, which is equal to where we were last time, 10 percentage point for the white students, and a 9.1 for the total. So an average of 8.6 percentage points increase, where we had a 7 percentage point increase in 2022-23. So this is absolutely great news.
And I just want to highlight, because I know we've talked to you about school improvement, that a lot of our schools have that ATSI and TSI,
Right.
and we won't go into what all those letters stand for today. But our Black subgroups, our students with disabilities, and our multiracial, those are some of the subgroups that our schools have been strategic of creating systems. And so I think this shows, again, a lot of promise when we're moving the needle of greater growth than we demonstrated last year. And I think that's our schools having a targeted approach to those subgroups.
So the next slide provides you the same information, but for ESC and ELL. The only thing that was not available was the free and reduced lunch status on those files. So you'll notice that for 22-23, all of the subgroups increased. Remember that the ELL population is very different from the Hispanic. Those are your students that sometimes are NES, non-English speakers, or LES, limited English speakers. So, but even still, you have a 1.1 percentage point increase when you're looking at 22-23. Now, when we flip to 23-24, ESC has a 7.1 percentage point increase, and our ELL babies have a 4.3 percentage point increase. And if you look at where we started, in PM1, we started higher in both ESC and ELL, and we are higher in both PM2 for ESC and for ELL.
And that I think speaks to true retention. So the fact in some of our other data, we've shown greater growth and we've ended in a higher, knowing that it's not apples to apples, but in this case, we're saying that what our students left with at the end of last year, they started with that same level. So when we're thinking of summer slide for our most fragile students, students with disabilities, and students where English is not their native language, they're retaining those skills. We demonstrated that in PM1, and now we're seeing that significant growth.
So we're going to look at the same pattern for the mathematics. This is 22, 23. From PM1 to PM2, we had an average growth of 20 percentage points. Third grade being one of the best, 26 percentage points between PM1 and 2. And then you also have fourth grade with 25 percentage points between 2 and 3. And sixth grade, 22 percentage points between 1 and 2. Again, all the grade levels last year increased by double digits. Now when we look at the growth for 23, 24, we note that it was a 16 percentage point increase from PM1 to PM2, whereas we were a 20 percentage point increase. The other thing is, and when we look at where we started last year, conversely to where we are this year, we're starting just a little bit lower, and we are still a little bit lower for PM2 in most of the grade levels, with the exception of grade 7 and 8. Those are the only ones that we're not starting lower. However, the good news is that the growth that we saw last year between PM2 and PM3 was about 17 percentage points. So if we are expecting the same type of growth, we should be at or above where we were last year.
And here's where, we're going to always be extremely transparent, and this is why we show up every day. There is still a lot of work to do in the area of math. So the third grade, I can absolutely, being a former third grade teacher, understand those teachers know what's going to be on the school grade, and that is, and not that, it's just when you put all your eggs in this basket, sometimes the potential to drop in one case. But something else we're really looking at is when we look at our seventh grade data, we want to really be focused on who is taking algebra in seventh grade to make sure, because if they're doing that EOC, they're not in here. And those are sometimes our sixth grade data has been very strong in math. But that doesn't mean that you have all the skills ready for pre-algebra. And so sometimes they're in that algebra as a seventh grader, and we're really addressing that because we want to make sure the course is meeting the trajectory to meet with success. But we also think that's a data point that we can improve upon just by making sure we're better meeting the needs of our students in their math trajectory, of making sure we're building foundational skills as they move up the ladder.
When we look at the next slide, that's the comparison of the ethnicities. And then you'll see that this is 22, 23, that for Black African American students, 11.4 percentage point increase between 1 and 2, 17 point percentage increase for Hispanic, 20% increase for your multiracial. And so every single one of the subgroups made gains between PM1 and PM2, and then PM2 and PM3. Conversely, when we look at the 23-24 comparison, we'll notice that for PM1, most of the grades 3, 4, and 5 were above where we started last year. Black African American students, Hispanics, and multiracial were above where we started last year, whereas the whites were just slightly below, 0.2 of a point, and then as a total, we started 0.3 of a point below where we started. Now, when we look at PM2 data in comparison to PM2 data from last year, the Black African American students are lower than they were in 22-23. The Hispanics were lower than they were in 22-23. So was multiracial, and so was Black, and so was overall the district.
So we're sharing the demographic data and the subgroup data because we know that that is an area of focus. But I can tell you just from knowing instruction, if you're having the levels of proficiency across the board in grade levels, before we even go to the subgroup data, when you have proficiency where it is, that's a tier 1 instruction issue. And so if we had significantly higher proficiency, and then we were finding subgroups of students that were having gaps, then we would say, okay, we need to do interventions. But in this case, when we're looking across the board, this tells me that it's a tier 1 instruction. So this is what do all students get in a math experience. And so that is our area of focus. When you have huge gaps between or certain grade levels that are not showing the significant growth, then you can say, okay, we may need to have intervention to build foundational skills. When it is flat like this, flat being growth or deficits in that growth, that is a tier 1 instruction. We need to change what all students are experiencing in math, and then everyone naturally levels up. So then all of your students level up when you increase the quality of that math block.
And when we look at the ESC students and the ELL students, we know that in 22-23, they demonstrated growth, 10.8 percentage points for the ESC students, 6.3 percentage points for the ELL students. When we compare them to the 23-24, we note that the ESC students are performing, for PM1, performed better than they did in 22-23, and performed for PM2, performed better than they did in 22-23, as well as the ELL and the, as well as the ELL students for both PM1 and PM2. Are there any questions?
Board members, any questions or comments you would like to add? This data I'm ecstatic about, honestly. Let me just say, this is very, very encouraging. So we are moving the right direction. Yeah.
Okay, I'm very excited about the reading data. The math data
Yes.
shows we got some work to do.
Yes.
So,
I just a couple of things. Thanks for the way that you walk through the explanation part, except for the beginning. That was really confusing. I'm glad I'm not early.
8:52, we're trying to get to an
No, it's not your
8:52.
fault. It's not your fault. I think it's important to, I think it's important when people look at numbers, I have to just add this disclaimer. I've decided that I'm always going to add this disclaimer when we start talking about data, because the public sees data like, that you broke down for, let's say, third graders, and say, let's say we've got, 34% or whatever, something, 55% of students scored a 3 or higher. So that means that 45% of our students can't read. And when I hear that, it frustrates me, because I have seen students very close to me who can read proficiently, but what's getting tested is comprehension, vocabulary, shading. If you have a disability or something that makes those complicated, you may be able to read fluently, but so for the public, let's just be careful with our wording, because if you have a student who scored a 1 and they can read just fine, but they have deficiencies in things like vocabulary and finding the themes and character motivation, especially as kids get older. I think we need to be careful with throwing that word around that students can't read, because I think we're going to find across our district that we have a lot of students who are scoring poorly, that we have gaps, and we want to meet those gaps. But to say that they can't read is highly inaccurate.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I failed to mention it, although I had it on the first slide about progress monitoring and what does that really mean. The expectation is not that we're going to have 100% of our students on grade level for progress monitoring 1. This is a progress monitoring. For the first time in the history of Florida, we have a way of gauging where are the students starting, now that we can compare them back to where they ended at PM3 based on their own scores, and then we can see where are they in PM2, and then where are they going to end up. So that temperature gauge that we are able to do now, the growth between PM1 and PM2 for individual students, that's critical for a school to be able to then say, okay, what do I need to take little Nada and move her to be a proficient student by PM3?
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate all this data.
Yes.
It's very important. This is why we're here. This is why we cut the grass.
Yes, yes.
To bring it full circle.
Well, and I think just before we close, I just know that the numbers are the first, page of the story, but what you really want to know is what comes next. And I think when we speak to the math, we know that legislation this year, 7069, came out with requiring the math interventions that have been previously required for ELA. And so while I know our classroom teachers felt that burden of one more thing, I think that this shows the need that as a state, we know that we have to reprioritize math. And so we're going to be raising the bar on expectations, but I know our students can do it, and I know that collectively, we can do it. But we're moving to be #1 in Florida, and
go.
I think that we can do it, and we will not. I wait for the day where we're presenting PM3 data where every child, we're showing all of this promise. But I think that we have plans to improve this data, and that's what's most important. Like, we're not satisfied with even the ELA celebrations.
Yeah. But there is a lot to be proud of there, so for
Yes.
that stuff. Thank you so much. I asked Mr. Susan if he was okay with moving his discussion topics till this evening, so we have time to break the room down, since we're kind of up against a clock at this point. So we're going to go ahead and adjourn the workshop. And guys, guess what? We won't have workshops anymore on the same day as we have board meetings, so we shouldn't potentially run into this, right? Because now moving forward our calendars.
Correct.
We will have more time, so we won't be bumping into each other. So, yeah, and you can say more, Mr. Trent. There you go. All right. So thank you guys again. Appreciate you.